For 20 years, my parents treated me like a useless burden. They told their wealthy country club friends I was a freelance failure who could barely pay rent. They had absolutely no idea what I really did for a living or the kind of power I actually held. But their ignorance became my greatest weapon the night my grandmother sent me a secret distress code. Exactly 15 minutes later, I kicked in the front door of their suburban mansion with two armed police officers by my side. My name is Melanie, and I am 33 years old. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who underestimated your worth and tried to destroy your life. The heavy oak front door of my parents' house flew open with a deafening crack that echoed through the massive foyer. Officer Jenkins and Officer Miller stood right behind me, their hands resting cautiously on their utility belts. We stepped straight into the grand entryway, tracking the cold evening air over the imported marble tiles. To our right, the formal dining room was illuminated by a massive crystal chandelier. My parents, Gregory and Cynthia, were seated at the long mahogany table along with my younger sister Brittany and her husband Malcolm. They were in the middle of a lavish catered dinner. Crystal wine glasses caught the light, and a private chef in a crisp white coat was just pouring a dark reduction sauce over their expensive steaks. The sudden intrusion froze everyone in place. The chef slowly backed away toward the kitchen's swinging door, clearly wanting no part of whatever was about to happen. My mother, Cynthia, dropped her heavy silver fork. It clattered loudly against her fine china plate. Her shocked expression quickly morphed into a mask of pure, unfiltered rage. She stood up so fast her dining chair scraped harshly against the hardwood floor. "Officers, arrest her right now!" Cynthia screamed, pointing her perfectly manicured finger directly at my chest. "My unemployed daughter is having another psychotic breakdown. She is delusional and dangerous. Please remove her from my property before she hurts someone." I did not flinch. I just stared at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel like a genetic mistake for not conforming to her superficial suburban standards. Brittany scoffed from across the table, swirling her expensive red wine with an elegant flick of her wrist. "She is probably just looking for a handout again," Brittany sneered, tossing her blonde hair over her shoulder. Just like when she dropped out of grad school at 22 because she could not handle the pressure. It is pathetic, honestly. I took a deliberate step forward, my voice deadly calm, slicing right through their arrogance. "I dropped out of grad school because our mother emptied my entire tuition savings account to pay off the hush money for your drunk driving settlement, Brittany." The dining room grew tense, but the officers exchanged a tired look. They had clearly been called to domestic disputes in wealthy neighborhoods before and wanted no part of this family drama. Officer Jenkins sighed heavily and adjusted his radio, stepping slightly toward the front door. "Ma'am, if this is just a family dispute over money, we need to leave. We cannot get involved in domestic arguments unless a crime is actively in progress. We suggest you handle this in civil court." My father, Gregory, finally stood up, smoothing down his designer tie with a smug look of satisfaction. "You heard the officer, Melanie. Take your cheap clothes and your imaginary problems out of my house right this second. You are ruining our evening." Malcolm, my African-American brother-in-law, leaned back in his chair and let out a loud, mocking laugh. As a high-profile hedge fund manager, Malcolm always wore tailored suits that cost more than my first car, and he never missed a chance to remind me of my supposed inferiority. "Leave the poor girl alone, Gregory," Malcolm mocked, flashing a perfectly white smile. "She fixes laptops for minimum wage. She probably just needs to borrow our Wi-Fi because hers got shut off again." I ignored his taunt completely. I did not care about his expensive suit or his money. I turned my attention back to Officer Miller, pulling my phone from my jacket pocket. I looked directly at my mother and read aloud clearly and deliberately, 19-2.168.1.45. The dining room went dead silent. Only the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway could be heard. "What absolute nonsense are you babbling about now?" Cynthia demanded, crossing her arms defensively. "That is the serial IP address for Grandma Beatrice's internal pacemaker monitor," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "It flatlined exactly 15 minutes ago. More importantly, the medical device did not send an automatic alert to the hospital because someone in this house manually disabled her emergency Wi-Fi router. The smug, arrogant smiles vanished from my family's faces instantly. The blood drained from Cynthia's cheeks, leaving her pale and trembling. Malcolm dropped his wine glass, the red liquid spilling across the pristine white tablecloth. Officer Jenkins immediately stopped walking toward the front door. His entire demeanor shifted from a bored patrolman to a highly alert law enforcement officer. His hand dropped straight to his heavy flashlight. Officer Miller unsnapped his radio from his belt, his eyes darting around the room. "Where is the grandmother?" Officer Jenkins asked, his voice suddenly sharp and commanding. "Upstairs, the master suite to the left," I replied, pointing toward the grand staircase. The officers did not hesitate for another second. They drew their flashlights and rushed past my frozen family, their heavy boots pounding up the carpeted stairs, leaving my parents and my sister pale, terrified, and completely speechless in the dining room. "Wait right there! You cannot go up there!" Gregory bellowed, his face turning an angry shade of purple. He lunged forward, throwing his arms wide across the bottom of the grand mahogany staircase. "This is private property, and you do not have a warrant. You are trespassing in my home." Officer Jenkins did not even break his stride. He lowered his shoulder and forcefully shoved my father aside, pressing him hard against the wooden banister. Gregory gasped in shock, completely unaccustomed to anyone challenging his authority in his own living room. Cynthia shrieked from the dining room, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings, demanding the badge numbers of the officers and threatening to call the mayor. I ignored the chaos, keeping my eyes locked on the landing above. I followed closely behind the heavy boots of the police officers, taking the stairs two at a time. The second-floor hallway was suffocatingly dark, save for the emergency medical light mounted above my grandmother's door. It was flashing a silent, urgent red warning. Officer Miller reached the heavy oak door first. He did not bother knocking. He grabbed the brass handle and shoved it open with a loud bang that rattled the expensive picture frames on the hallway walls. The stench of sterile rubbing alcohol, unwashed sheets, and stale, stagnant air hit me instantly. The room was cast in deep shadows, but the glow from the streetlights outside illuminated the horrifying scene. The expensive medical monitors we had installed were completely dark, their power cords deliberately yanked from the wall sockets. And standing right beside the adjustable hospital bed was Malcolm. He had his heavy hand clamped tightly over my grandmother Beatrice's frail, bruised wrist. He was leaning over her aggressively, actively forcing a black ink pen into her trembling, arthritic fingers. He was physically pressing her hand against a thick stack of legal documents resting on a rigid clipboard. Grandma Beatrice looked terrible. Her eyes were half closed, her skin was pale and clammy, and her breathing was shallow and raspy. She looked entirely incapacitated, yet Malcolm was treating her like a human signature stamp. Malcolm snapped his head up, his eyes wide with a flash of panic that quickly hardened into arrogant fury. He dropped my grandmother's hand, letting her arm fall limply against the mattress, and quickly hid the pen behind his back. Before the officers could even speak, Brittany pushed her way past our parents on the landing and squeezed into the bedroom doorway. She did not look at the blank heart monitors. She did not look at the fresh bruises on her own grandmother's wrist. Instead, she looked at me with absolute, unfiltered disgust. "You are so pathetic, Melanie." Brittany sneered, her voice dripping with venom. "You are always trying to ruin our family moments. You cannot stand to see anyone else happy or taking care of business. Malcolm is just helping Grandma sign a standard medical release for her new physical therapy treatments. You just had to bring the police into our house to throw another one of your desperate tantrums." She crossed her arms, looking me up and down with a condescending glare. "But I guess we should not expect anything less from you. You really would not understand standard legal paperwork, Melanie. Your entire career consists of fixing broken laptops and setting up email passwords for minimum wage. Leave the adult responsibilities to people who actually matter." I kept my posture completely relaxed. I did not raise my voice, and I did not let her see even an ounce of intimidation. I kept my eyes locked on Malcolm, who was slowly backing away from the bed, desperately trying to slide the clipboard under a stack of heavy blankets. I understand enough to know that a simple medical release form does not require a thumbprint ink pad and a witness signature line, I replied, my voice slicing through the tense room like a blade. I also understand that fixing computers for minimum wage is still infinitely better than stealing from the elderly, which is exactly what you two have been doing ever since you maxed out all your credit cards to pay for that disastrous destination wedding you forced Mom and Dad to finance. Brittany let out an offended gasp, her face turning bright red. How dare you speak to me like that? Malcolm makes more in a week than you will make in your entire miserable lifetime. Officer Jenkins stepped right between me and Malcolm, cutting off Brittany's rant. Step away from the bed, sir, the officer commanded, shining his bright flashlight directly into Malcolm's eyes. Hand over the paperwork right now. What exactly are you doing in the dark with an unresponsive patient? Malcolm squinted against the harsh light but quickly recovered his composure. He straightened the lapels of his $5,000 tailored suit, cleared his throat, and put on his best hedge fund manager persona. It was the exact same smooth, confident mask he used to charm wealthy investors and intimidate anyone he considered beneath his tax bracket. Officers, I truly apologize for this ridiculous interruption, Malcolm said, his tone perfectly calibrated to sound reasonable and authoritative. My sister-in-law has a well-documented history of mental instability and extreme jealousy. Please escort this woman out of my in-laws' house immediately before I am forced to press charges for trespassing and harassment. He smoothly retrieved the clipboard from the bed and held it against his chest like a shield. I am a licensed financial fiduciary and a respected managing director. I know the law inside and out. What you are looking at is not a crime. It is a legally binding, fully notarized power of attorney document. Beatrice's health has been declining rapidly, and the family agreed that someone responsible needed to step in. As of this exact moment, I am legally in charge of Beatrice's entire estate, her medical decisions, and all of her financial assets. He confidently thrust the thick stack of papers toward the officers. The heavy gold seal of a notary public gleamed distinctly in the beam of the officer's flashlight. Officer Miller tentatively took the document, his eyes scanning the dense legal jargon, clearly uncertain of how to proceed against a wealthy man claiming ultimate legal jurisdiction. I stepped forward, moving right beside the officer. I casually glanced down at the final page of the document over his shoulder. My eyes locked onto the specific notary stamp and the date printed beneath it. A slow, chilling smile spread across my face. I looked up and met Malcolm's arrogant gaze. You hold a legally binding power of attorney, I asked, my voice echoing loudly in the quiet room. I let out a sharp, cold laugh that wiped the smug expression right off his face. Notarized by Crestwood Legal on Tuesday, Malcolm lets out a harsh, abrasive bark of laughter that completely lacks any real humor. He tightens his grip on the clipboard, pressing the thick stack of papers against his chest like a shield. He glares down at me with the same sneering superiority he has directed my way since the day Brittany first brought him home to our family dinners. Crestwood Legal is a highly respected corporate firm, Malcolm says, his voice dripping with absolute condescension. But I would not expect someone like you to understand how high-level estate management works. You fix broken hard drives for a living. Why do you not take your little tablet, go back to your basement job, and leave the adult responsibilities to people who actually know how to build wealth? My father, Gregory, pushes his way past the police officers on the landing. He completely ignores my grandmother, lying helpless and heavily medicated in the bed right behind us. Instead, he marches right up to stand shoulder to shoulder with Malcolm. The visual is entirely sickening, but perfectly on brand for my family. My own father eagerly aligning himself with a smooth-talking fraudster to put his daughter in her place. Listen to your brother-in-law right now. Gregory barks, his face flushing with an ugly, dark anger. He points a finger directly at my face, stepping aggressively into my personal space. Malcolm handles multi-million-dollar hedge funds. He manages real assets for important people. He is the son we never had. You are just jealous because you have accomplished absolutely nothing with your life. Brittany steps out from the hallway shadows, folding her arms tightly across her chest. Her designer dress rustles softly as she sneers at me. You are just making things up again, Melanie. You spend all your time reading internet conspiracy theories because you have no real friends and no real career to focus on. Malcolm only uses the most elite lawyers in the city. You are embarrassing yourself in front of these officers. I do not yell back. I do not raise my voice to match their frantic, manic energy. I simply tap the screen of my tablet. The bright backlight illuminates the dark space between us. I turn the screen around, holding it up so the harsh light hits Malcolm right in the face. I am not jealous of a man whose notary just got indicted by the FBI for wire fraud, I reply, my voice slicing through the heavy air with ice-cold precision. Malcolm freezes. The arrogant smirk vanishes from his face in a fraction of a second. His eyes dart down to the glowing screen of my tablet. Crestwood Legal was raided exactly 48 hours ago. I state clearly, making sure every single person in the room hears the devastating details. The lead partner, the exact same man whose signature is stamped in fresh ink on that power of attorney document you are holding, was escorted out of his glass office in federal handcuffs. He is currently facing severe federal charges for forging backdated legal documents. His specialty is helping predatory investors liquidate assets from vulnerable, incapacitated elderly clients so they can hide the stolen money in offshore accounts. That is a lie, Cynthia shouts from the hallway, her voice shrill and panicked. She grabs her husband's arm, shaking it. Malcolm is a managing director. He is featured in financial magazines. Tell her she is lying. Malcolm? But Malcolm does not speak. He swallows hard. The confident, wealthy hedge fund manager is suddenly struggling to catch his breath. His rigid, perfect posture falters, and his broad shoulders slump forward. He stares at the tablet screen like it is a loaded weapon aimed right at his chest. That is classified federal information. Malcolm demands, his voice cracking with a sudden, aggressive panic. He takes a desperate lunging step toward me, reaching out roughly, as if he wants to physically snatch the tablet from my hands and smash it on the floor. Officer Jenkins immediately steps between us. He holds up a strong hand, physically blocking Malcolm's path, while his other hand rests firmly on his duty belt. Stand back, sir, the officer commands, his tone leaving absolutely zero room for negotiation. Do not take another step toward her. Malcolm ignores the officer's warning. His eyes are wide, darting frantically around the room like a trapped animal looking for an exit. Sweat is beginning to bead on his forehead, ruining his perfectly groomed appearance. Those records are sealed by a federal judge. Malcolm stammers, his voice rising in pitch as desperation takes over. The press does not even have that story yet. It has not been leaked to the public in any capacity. How does a nobody like you know about a classified FBI raid? I lower the tablet slowly. I look right into his terrified, unblinking eyes. I let the silence stretch for a moment, letting the sheer weight of his impending doom settle over him. Because my cybersecurity firm provided the digital forensics that got them raided. The silence that crashes down over the room is absolute. The words echo against the bedroom walls, completely shattering the grand illusion my family has lived in for the past decade. I watch my father's mouth fall open in mute shock. He looks at me as if I have suddenly sprouted a second head, unable to comprehend the words that just left my mouth. Brittany stares at me, her jaw hanging slack, her eyes wide with total confusion. She is entirely unable to process the fact that her favorite punching bag of a sister just claimed responsibility for a massive federal takedown. Malcolm looks like he has just been struck by a high-voltage electrical current. He opens his mouth to speak, to deny it, to spin another desperate lie, but the words completely die in his throat. He knows I am telling the absolute truth. He knows exactly what kind of careless digital trail he left behind in his shady dealings, and he realizes in a sickening wave of clarity that I am the one who found it all. Before anyone can utter another sound, a sharp rhythmic buzzing shatters the quiet tension in the room. Malcolm violently flinches. He looks down at his wrist as if he has been bitten. His expensive diamond-encrusted smartwatch is vibrating frantically against his skin. The bright digital screen cuts through the dim lighting, flashing relentlessly with an incoming call. I can clearly read the caller ID from where I am standing. It says, Board of Directors. Malcolm stares at the vibrating watch with pure, unadulterated terror. His firm is calling him at this late hour of the night. They know. The digital trail has finally caught up to his physical reality. The ultimate facade he built his entire life around is crashing down, and there is absolutely nowhere left for him to hide. Malcolm stares at his vibrating wrist as if a venomous snake has just wrapped itself around his arm. All the color instantly drains from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. He stumbles backward, his expensive Italian leather shoes scraping clumsily against the polished hardwood floor. He clutches his wrist, gasping for air, as if the room has suddenly run out of oxygen. Pushing frantically past Officer Miller, he retreats into the dimly lit hallway. We can hear his frantic, high-pitched whispers echoing off the vaulted ceilings as he desperately tries to answer the call from his furious board of directors without anyone hearing the details of his demise. Brittany cannot handle the sudden violent shift in the power dynamic. Her golden husband is currently hyperventilating in the hall, and the illusion of her perfect life is cracking wide open. She immediately goes on the attack, stepping squarely in front of me to physically block my view of the hallway. She tosses her expensive blonde extensions over her shoulder and eyes my simple black blazer and slacks with pure, unfiltered disgust. "You think you are so smart with your little tablet, Melanie?" Brittany sneers, her voice shrill and desperate to regain control of the narrative. "Look at you. You barge into our parents' house looking like you just bought your entire outfit off a clearance rack at a discount outlet. You are just bitter. You have always been bitter because Malcolm provides a lifestyle you will never achieve in your entire pathetic life." I do not blink. I do not raise my voice or react to her childish insults. I simply keep my tablet securely in my hand, my thumb hovering over the glass screen. "Malcolm is a provider." Brittany brags loudly, intentionally projecting her voice so our parents and the two police officers hear every single word. "He literally just bought me a $4 million penthouse in Aspen for our anniversary last week. We are spending the entire winter skiing with A-list celebrities and actual important people. You could not even afford to buy the front doormat for a place like that. That is why you are here, is it not? You are making up these insane lies about federal raids because you want mom and dad to pity you and write you a check. You are just begging for a handout." I look at my sister, feeling absolutely no pity for the harsh reality she is about to face. I tap the screen of my tablet twice, bringing up a highly secure public financial registry database. I hold the device up, rotating it so she is forced to look at the highlighted legal text. "He did not buy a penthouse in Aspen, Brittany." I say, my voice steady and loud enough for my parents to hear clearly from the landing. "According to these property records, it is a short-term lease registered under a shell corporation called Apex Holdings, LLC. And the only way your provider husband even secured that temporary lease was by putting down a massive collateral deposit." Cynthia gasps loudly from the hallway behind me, her hands flying to her chest. Gregory pushes forward again, his face turning an angry, defensive shade of red. "Do not speak to your sister that way in my house," my father barks, stepping up next to Brittany to form a united front against me. "Malcolm is brilliant with money. He is a financial visionary. You have no idea how corporate real estate works." I lock eyes with my father, my expression turning to ice. "He is a desperate man drowning in debt, Dad." I tracked his wire transfers through my forensic servers. "Malcolm leveraged your entire joint retirement fund as collateral for a massive margin call he received last Tuesday. He needed immediate liquid cash to cover his failing offshore investments, and he used your life savings to stop the bank from seizing his assets." Gregory throws his head back and lets out a booming, arrogant laugh. It echoes down the grand staircase, completely devoid of any real humor. He crosses his arms over his chest, looking down at me with the exact same condescending glare he used when I was a teenager asking for help with my college applications. "You really are a fool, Melanie," my father chuckles, shaking his head. "You think you have uncovered some grand conspiracy I authorized that transfer myself. I gladly gave Malcolm access to the retirement fund. He told me about a high-yield exclusive offshore opportunity. He is going to double our money by the end of the fiscal quarter. You are just too uneducated in high-level finance to understand how real wealth is generated by professionals." I do not argue with him. I do not waste my breath trying to convince a man who has spent 20 years treating me like a financial burden while blindly worshipping a con artist. I simply swipe my thumb across my tablet screen, switching from the property registry to a live read-only view of Gregory and Cynthia's primary banking portfolio. I step forward and shove the glowing screen directly into my father's line of sight, forcing him to look at the digital numbers. Take a good look at how your wealth is generating, Dad, I command softly. Gregory squints at the bright screen. His confident, arrogant smirk begins to twitch at the corners. His eyes widen as he scans the digital ledger, desperately searching for the massive doubled numbers he expects to see. He blinks rapidly, his breathing suddenly hitching in his chest. Cynthia grabs his shoulder, leaning in closely to look at the screen herself. She lets out a strangled, horrified gasp, clapping a trembling hand over her mouth. The retirement account balance staring back at them in stark, bold red numbers is exactly $0.00. The red zeros on the screen reflected brightly in my father's wide, disbelieving eyes. For a long, agonizing second, the only sound in the room was the harsh, ragged breathing of Malcolm hyperventilating out in the hallway. Gregory blinked rapidly, violently, shaking his head as if he could physically rattle the digital numbers into changing. He looked from the glowing screen to my face, then back down to the tablet. His expression contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated denial. "This is a trick," Gregory growled, his voice low and shaking with a volatile, dangerous energy. "You hacked into my personal account. You manipulated the banking interface to make it look like this. Malcolm is a licensed professional. He would never touch the principal balance without a secure, guaranteed hedge." I did not flinch, keeping the tablet perfectly steady in my hands. "I did not hack anything, Dad. That is a direct, live feed from your own banking portal. You gave a con artist the master authorization keys to your entire life savings. He used your money to cover his catastrophic losses, and now it is gone. Every single penny has been wiped out." "Liar," Gregory roared. The heavy blanket of denial violently shifted into explosive, uncontrollable rage. He lunged forward, throwing his full body weight directly into me. His heavy hand slammed hard into my shoulders, shoving me backward with a forceful, aggressive thrust I did not anticipate. I stumbled hard against the heavy wooden footboard of my grandmother's bed. My tablet slipped from my grip, clattering loudly onto the polished hardwood floor. "Hey, back away right now," Officer Miller shouted, his voice a sharp, commanding bark that demanded absolute obedience. In a fraction of a second, the officer bridged the gap between us. He grabbed my father by the back of his expensive suit jacket and physically wrenched him away from me. With practiced tactical efficiency, Officer Miller pinned Gregory's arm securely behind his back and slammed him face first into the patterned hallway wallpaper. "Do not move another muscle, sir, or you are leaving your house in handcuffs," Officer Miller warned, his tone absolutely lethal. "Get your hands off my husband," Cynthia shrieked, rushing blindly into the room from the stairwell. She threw herself at the officer, frantically batting at his heavy utility uniform with her perfectly manicured hands. "He is the victim here. Our daughter is a psychotic, manipulative liar." Officer Jenkins immediately stepped in, effortlessly corralling my mother and physically blocking her from interfering with his partner. "Ma'am, step back immediately, or you will be arrested for assaulting a police officer. Control yourself right this second." Cynthia practically vibrated with rage, her styled hair now a chaotic mess around her flushed face. Restricted by the officer's outstretched arm, she aimed all of her venom directly at me, seeking to destroy my credibility in front of the law enforcement officials. "You always fabricate things, Melanie," Cynthia yelled, her voice echoing shrilly off the high bedroom ceilings. "You have been a toxic, pathological liar since you were 15 years old. You stood right in our kitchen and claimed your own father was embezzling funds from his own philanthropic charity. You tried to destroy his reputation back then with your fake internet sleuthing, and you are trying to do it again right now to ruin Brittany's marriage." I slowly stood up straight, brushing the dust from my dark blazer. The mention of that specific charity sent a cold, familiar anger rushing through my veins. It was the exact moment in my childhood when I realized my family was fundamentally broken and morally bankrupt. "I did not lie." I snapped back, my voice echoing with a fierce, unwavering authority. that made her physically flinch. I found his hidden dual ledgers on the home computer. I saw the exact offshore routing numbers he used to siphon donation money meant for the children's hospital into his private holding accounts. Gregory struggled against the wall, but Officer Miller pressed him harder against the drywall, effectively silencing his protests. I had all the digital evidence downloaded and secured. I continued staring directly into my mother's terrified eyes. I stayed completely quiet for 18 years to keep you out of federal prison, Mom. Because your signature was on every single fraudulent tax return as the charity's co-director. I chose to swallow that poison to protect you, but clearly I should have let the feds lock you both up when I had the chance. The blood drained entirely from Cynthia's face. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The absolute truth of my words stripped away her righteous indignation, leaving only raw, naked panic. She looked wildly around the room, realizing the police officers were listening to every single word of this very loud, very incriminating confession. Desperate to regain control of the narrative and shift the focus away from the financial crimes, Cynthia quickly dug her hand deep into the pocket of her tailored slacks. She pulled out a crumpled, folded piece of heavy stock paper and thrust it toward Officer Jenkins with trembling fingers. "This is all a distraction!" Cynthia stammered, her voice breathless and frantic. "Melanie is just trying to stop us from getting Beatrice the medical help she desperately needs. Beatrice has severe late-stage dementia. The primary physician signed a mandatory order to commit her to a secure psychiatric asylum tonight. We are not hurting her. We are just protecting her." Officer Jenkins took the crumpled paper, his brow furrowing as he shined his heavy flashlight over the printed medical letterhead. I stepped forward, peering over the officer's arm to look at the document. My eyes scanned the harsh black ink, bypassing the dense medical jargon and landing squarely on the signature line at the very bottom of the page. I let out a slow, dark chuckle. I looked up at my mother, a dangerous, victorious smile spreading across my face. My dark, victorious smile completely unsettled my mother. Cynthia instinctively pulled the crumpled paper back toward her chest, holding it like a physical shield. But Officer Jenkins was already reaching out his thick, gloved hand. "Hand the document over right now, ma'am." Officer Jenkins demanded, his tone entirely devoid of the patience he had shown her downstairs. Cynthia reluctantly released the paper, her perfectly manicured fingers trembling visibly under the harsh glare of the officer's heavy flashlight. She immediately tried to spin her web of lies, her voice pitching an octave higher as she played the role of the desperate, concerned daughter. "You have to understand," Officer Cynthia pleaded dramatically, pressing a hand to her forehead. "My mother has completely lost her mind. She wanders the halls at night. She does not even know her own name anymore. The doctor made it very clear that keeping her in this house is a severe danger to herself and to us. We arranged for a private medical transport to take her to a specialized, secure facility tonight for her own safety. Melanie is just trying to interfere because she wants to steal the inheritance." Officer Jenkins ignored her frantic monologue. He flattened the crumpled paper against his clipboard, shining his flashlight directly onto the thick black text and the messy scrawled signature at the very bottom. I stepped right up beside the officer, maintaining my absolute calm. I did not yell, and I did not try to snatch the paper. I simply raised my hand and pointed a single steady finger directly at the bold letterhead printed across the top of the medical order. "Dr. Eris Thorne." I read aloud, letting the name hang heavily in the stale, stagnant air of my grandmother's bedroom. Cynthia physically recoiled, as if she had just been slapped across the face. The remaining color drained completely from her cheeks, leaving her skin a ghostly pallid white. She opened her mouth to speak, but her throat seemed entirely paralyzed. I turned my head slowly, locking my gaze onto my mother's terrified eyes. "The exact same Dr. Eris Thorne who illegally prescribed you those highly restricted, unapproved weight loss pills for the past 3 years, Mom?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet, but carrying enough force to shatter her entire facade. "The same private concierge doctor you always bragged to your country club friends about, because he never asked any annoying medical questions and always accepted cash in unmarked envelopes." Cynthia let out a sharp, strangled gasp. She stumbled backward, her designer heels catching on the thick Persian rug. She collided heavily with the wooden doorframe, her hands clutching her throat. "That is completely irrelevant." Cynthia choked out her eyes, darting frantically toward the police officers. "He is a respected medical professional. He evaluated Beatrice yesterday and determined she was a threat to herself." "You did not bring a respected medical professional into this house," I snapped back, dropping the quiet demeanor and letting my absolute disgust show. "You brought a criminal into my grandmother's bedroom. I found his hidden cash ledgers on your laptop months ago. I traced the wire transfers you sent to his offshore accounts to pay for your illegal prescriptions. I stayed completely quiet to keep you out of a federal prison cell, Mom, but clearly I should not have shown you an ounce of mercy." Gregory struggled violently against the hallway wall, trying to break free from Officer Miller's iron grip. "You are a liar, Melanie," Gregory roared, his voice cracking with desperate blind rage. "Do not listen to a word she says. She is trying to ruin this family." Officer Miller simply shoved his forearm harder against the back of my father's neck, pinning him entirely motionless against the expensive floral wallpaper. "Keep your mouth shut and face the wall," Officer Miller growled. I turned my attention entirely to Officer Jenkins, who was now scrutinizing the medical document with intense, highly trained suspicion. I connected the horrifying dots for him, speaking clearly and deliberately, so there was absolutely no room for misunderstanding. "Look at my grandmother, officer," I instructed, gesturing toward the frail, deeply unconscious woman lying in the dark bed. "She does not have severe dementia. She was perfectly lucid 2 days ago when she secretly texted me a distress code. Malcolm desperately needed a signed power of attorney to access her estate so he could pay off his massive hedge fund debts. But Beatrice refused to sign it. So they brought in a disgraced, corrupt doctor to completely incapacitate her, and they were going to ship her off to a private asylum tonight, so a judge could not block the asset liquidation." Brittany shrieked from the hallway, her voice shrill and panicked. "Shut up, Melanie. You are making up insane conspiracy theories." I ignored my sister entirely. I kept my eyes locked on Officer Jenkins. "Officer," I said, my voice ringing with undeniable authority, "run Dr. Aris Thorne's medical license number through your dispatch right now." Officer Jenkins did not hesitate for a single second. He unclipped the heavy radio from his duty belt, his eyes never leaving the crumpled paper in his hand. He keyed the microphone, the sharp static click echoing loudly in the tense, suffocating silence of the bedroom. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4, Officer Jenkins said, his voice dropping into a cold, professional cadence. "I need an immediate background and license check on a medical practitioner. First name Aris, Aris. Last name Thorne, Thorne. Copy that." "Unit 4. The dispatcher's voice crackled back through the small speaker. "Stand by for records." The wait felt like an eternity. The only sounds in the room were the shallow, raspy breathing of my unconscious grandmother and the frantic, hyperventilating gasps coming from Malcolm out in the hallway. Cynthia pressed herself flat against the doorframe, visibly trembling. Her eyes squeezed tightly shut, as if she could somehow block out reality. Gregory had stopped struggling entirely, his heavy body sagging against the wall in sudden, terrifying defeat. Then the radio crackled back to life. The dispatcher's voice was tinny and mechanical, but the words were utterly devastating. "Unit 4, be advised. Aris Thorne has no active medical credentials in this state. His medical license was permanently revoked 3 years ago by the State Medical Board. Subject is currently under active federal investigation." Officer Jenkins stiffened his hand, gripping the radio tightly. "Reason for revocation, dispatch. License revoked for illegal distribution of narcotics and prescribing heavy, unauthorized sedatives to elderly patients in order to alter their legal wills and estate planning documents. Subject is considered a high flight risk." The absolute deafening silence that crashed down over the room was heavier than concrete. The grand illusion of my family's wealthy, untouchable superiority evaporated into nothing. Officer Jenkins slowly lowered his radio. He looked at the forged medical document in his hand, then looked over at the bruised wrist of my unconscious grandmother, and finally locked eyes with my terrified mother. The bored, tired patrolman who had walked into the foyer 15 minutes ago was completely gone. Officer Miller immediately unclipped his own radio, his grip on my father tightening like a vice. Unit 4, to dispatch Officer Jenkins, said, his voice slicing through the room with lethal, uncompromising authority. We have a major felony crime scene. Send emergency medical services for an unresponsive elderly victim and get a team of detectives to this address right now. Nobody is leaving this house. The heavy, uncompromising finality of Officer Jenkins' command hangs in the stagnant air of the bedroom like a physical weight. The sudden reality of a major felony crime scene declaration paralyzes my parents. Cynthia remains frozen against the wooden doorframe, her silent, gasping sobs vibrating through her rigid shoulders. Gregory sags completely against the hallway wallpaper under the firm, unyielding grip of Officer Miller. The grand illusion of their untouchable wealth and superior status is utterly shattered. But Brittany, standing just inside the bedroom doorway, refuses to accept defeat. Her eyes dart frantically around the space, searching for any possible escape route, any desperate way to salvage her crumbling lifestyle and keep her hands clean. Her frantic gaze locks onto the heavy embossed leather portfolio resting innocently on the quilt at the foot of my grandmother's bed. It is the folder Malcolm brought into the house, the one containing the rest of their forged legal preparations. Pure, unadulterated panic overrides my sister's common sense. Brittany lets out a guttural, desperate noise and lunges forward. She abandons all of her practiced social grace, her expensive designer heels slipping clumsily on the Persian rug as she dives directly past Officer Jenkins. She throws her entire body weight toward the bed, her hands outstretched like desperate claws aiming to snatch the portfolio and tear the incriminating evidence to shreds before the police can examine it. But I am faster. Years of constantly anticipating my family's relentless betrayals have honed my reflexes to a razor-sharp edge. I step firmly into her path, using my own body to physically barricade her from the bed. As her hands reach frantically for the leather folder, I reach out and grab her right wrist. I do not offer a gentle restraint. I grip her forearm with unyielding force and twist it sharply backward, applying just enough precise, painful pressure to stop her forward momentum completely. Brittany lets out a high, sharp squeal of pain, her perfectly manicured acrylic nails swiping empty air mere inches from the documents. I do not let go of her arm. With my free hand, I reach behind me and snatch the heavy portfolio off the quilt, securing it tightly against my chest. I release her wrist with a forceful shove and take a deliberate step back, putting myself safely out of her reach while keeping the evidence completely secure. Brittany recoils, clutching her bruised wrist against her chest. Her face twists into an ugly, furious mask of pure childish entitlement. She completely ignores the two armed police officers standing just feet away, entirely consumed by her own selfish rage and the sudden denial of getting exactly what she wants. "You always steal my things!" Brittany screams, her voice echoing shrilly off the vaulted ceiling and causing Officer Jenkins to instinctively place a hand on his utility belt. "You have been insanely jealous of me our entire lives. You always try to ruin what I have, just like when you tried to steal my spot on the varsity cheer team in high school. You have always wanted exactly what belongs to me because you are nothing but a bitter loser." I stare at my sister, my grip tightening around the leather portfolio until my knuckles turn white. The sheer, staggering magnitude of her delusion is almost difficult to comprehend. She is actively facing a lengthy federal prison sentence for elder abuse and fraud, yet her mind instantly reverts to a petty high school popularity contest from a decade ago. "I did not try to steal your spot, Brittany," I reply, my voice dropping to a low, icy tone that drips with absolute contempt. "I earned my spot on that team through 6 months of grueling, relentless practice. You were put on that roster for one reason only. Dad secretly handed the head coach a $10,000 cash bribe hidden inside a Booster Club donation envelope. I saw the bank withdrawal receipt sitting right on his office desk. You have never earned a single achievement in your entire pathetic life. Everything you possess is bought with dirty, stolen money, just like how your provider husband is trying to bribe and steal his way out of federal bankruptcy right now." Brittany gasps loudly, her jaw dropping open as she prepares to scream another frantic denial. but I refuse to give her the opportunity to speak. I flip open the heavy cover of the leather portfolio I just rescued from her grasp. I fully expect to find more fake psychiatric evaluations, or perhaps a forged medical transport release form to justify removing my frail grandmother from the house in the middle of the night. But as my eyes scan the dense, highly classified legal text printed on the thick ivory paper, the blood runs completely cold in my veins. The sheer scale of their malicious greed is far worse than I ever anticipated. I look up from the document, my gaze cutting straight through the tension in the room and locking directly onto Malcolm. He is still hovering in the dimly lit hallway behind Officer Miller, his face slick with a cold, terrified sweat. "This is not a medical release form," I announce, my voice ringing out with crystal clear, unwavering authority. Every single eye in the room snaps toward me. "This is an irrevocable international wire authorization," I read aloud, holding the document up so Officer Jenkins can clearly see the official banking seals and the forged signature line. It is a direct, immediate transfer order. It is pre-filled to liquidate and drain the entirety of Beatrice's $5 million estate directly into a shielded offshore account registered in the Cayman Islands. And the sole beneficiary of this account is listed right here at the bottom of the page: Apex Holdings, LLC. The exact same shell company Malcolm used to lease your temporary Aspen penthouse. The ultimate theft is laid entirely bare under the harsh light of the bedroom. The heavy, suffocating silence that crashes down over the room is absolute and deafening. Officer Jenkins immediately reaches for his radio again, his posture shifting into high alert as the staggering magnitude of the financial crime is officially revealed. Malcolm realizes the game is completely over. The walls are rapidly closing in, and a federal prison cell is staring him right in the face. His eyes widen in pure animalistic terror. He does not offer a single word of defense. He does not try to explain his actions or protect his furious, panicked wife. He simply spins around on his expensive Italian leather shoes, shoving his way blindly down the hallway, and makes a desperate, frantic sprint toward the grand staircase. Malcolm does not even make it to the edge of the landing. He turns and sprints with the blind, frantic desperation of a cornered animal, his expensive leather shoes scraping wildly against the polished oak floorboards. But Officer Miller is already moving. Abandoning his post beside my frozen, defeated father, the officer launches himself down the length of the corridor with terrifying speed. He closes the gap in 3 massive strides. Just as Malcolm reaches out to grab the carved wooden banister of the grand staircase, Officer Miller tackles him squarely between the shoulder blades. The impact is brutal and deafening. They crash to the hardwood floor in a tangled heap of limbs. The sickening sound of expensive fabric ripping tears through the air as the custom seams of Malcolm's bespoke tailored suit jacket burst completely open under the sheer force of the takedown. Malcolm thrashes violently on the floor, kicking his legs and flailing his arms like a petulant child throwing a tantrum. "Get off me!" he shrieks, his voice pitching into a hysterical, breathless squeal. "You have no right to touch me. I know the mayor. I will have your badge for this." Officer Miller ignores the empty threats entirely. He drives his heavy knee directly into the center of Malcolm's ruined suit jacket, pinning the struggling man flat against the floorboards. In 2 swift, practiced motions, he wrenches Malcolm's arms forcefully behind his back. The sharp, metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs, ratcheting tightly around Malcolm's wrists, echoes loudly down the vaulted hallway. "Stop resisting, or I will add assaulting an officer to your growing list of felony charges." Officer Miller barks, his voice devoid of any sympathy. He grabs Malcolm by the collar of his torn jacket and hauls him roughly up into a kneeling position against the wooden balustrade. Brittany rushes out of the bedroom, her face streaked with ruined mascara and tears of absolute panic. She stops dead in her tracks at the sight of her golden provider husband kneeling on the floor in handcuffs, his expensive clothes torn and ruined. Malcolm realizes physical escape is now completely impossible. The heavy steel bites into his wrists, and the reality of his impending federal prison sentence crashes down on him. Desperate to regain control, he violently shifts his tactics, reverting to the only defensive strategy he has left: He glares up at me as I walk calmly down the hallway to stand over him. His face twists into a mask of righteous, fabricated indignation. "This is profiling!" Malcolm yells, his voice booming down the grand staircase to ensure everyone in the house hears his performance. "You are targeting me because I am a successful black man, making millions of dollars. You cannot stand to see me thrive, and you are just a bitter single loser, Melanie. You are spinning these racist, psychotic lies because you are jealous of my wealth and my marriage." Brittany immediately seizes on this fabricated narrative, eager to protect the illusion of her perfect life. "He is right," she screams, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You are just a jealous, lonely spinster. You cannot handle that. Malcolm built an empire while you amount to nothing." I do not raise my voice. I do not react to the insults or the desperate, pathetic attempt to play the victim card. I simply step closer to the kneeling man, the heavy leather portfolio still clutched securely under my arm. I slowly crouch down, bringing my face perfectly level with his sweating, terrified eyes. I stare at him with an expression of absolute chilling indifference. "I do not care about your race or your fancy tailored suits, Malcolm," I say, my voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper that completely slices through his hysterical shouting. "I care that my forensic software tracked the $800,000 you stole directly from your corporate clients to pay off your massive gambling debts in Macau last month." The air in the hallway instantly turns to ice. Malcolm's jaw snaps shut. The fabricated righteous anger vanishes from his face in a fraction of a second, replaced by a hollow, paralyzing dread. I lean in an inch closer, making sure he hears every single detail of his own destruction. "You thought routing the stolen client funds through dummy shell corporations in Cyprus would hide the money trail. You thought transferring it into cryptocurrency before paying the casino markers would make it untraceable. But you are arrogant, Malcolm, and your arrogance made you sloppy. I decrypted the entire ledger 3 days ago. I have every single transaction timestamp, every routing number, and the exact names of the clients you defrauded. You are not a millionaire visionary. You are a degenerate gambling addict who resorted to stealing from a dying elderly woman because the high-stakes cartel in Macau threatened to break your legs if you did not pay up." Gregory lets out a strangled, horrifying gasp from the bedroom doorway. The final pieces of the puzzle violently click into place in my father's mind. His entire joint retirement fund was not lost in a bad hedge fund market. It was flushed down a casino table on the other side of the world to save the life of a con artist. Gregory clutches his chest, physically sliding down the doorframe until he hits the floor, his breathing ragged and shallow. Brittany stares at her husband, her mouth hanging open. The complete lack of denial on Malcolm's face is the most damning confession of all. He does not scream. He does not fight back. He just stares at the floor, his breathing coming in short, panicked wheezes as his entire fabricated empire burns to ash around him. During the violent scuffle with the police officer, Malcolm's sleek, expensive smartphone had slipped out of his tailored trouser pocket. It now lies face up on the hardwood floor, resting just inches from the toe of my black shoe. Suddenly, the dark screen of the phone illuminates the dim hallway. A sharp melodic chime cuts through the heavy silence as a new notification banner pops up across the locked display. I slowly lower my gaze to the glowing glass screen. I read the notification banner, a dark, victorious smile spreading across my face. I reach down and pick up the vibrating device, holding it up so the bright screen is perfectly visible to Malcolm, Brittany, and both police officers. "Well, Malcolm," I announce, my voice echoing clearly down the grand staircase. "It looks like my digital forensic report was not the only thing you had to worry about today." I turn the phone toward my sister, forcing her to look at the bright notification banner. "You have a new text message from a contact named Lexi," I read aloud, emphasizing every single devastating word. The message says, "The SEC is raiding your office right now. Did you get the old lady's money yet?" Brittany lets out a piercing, hysterical shriek, clapping her hands over her ears, as if she can physically block out the reality of her shattered life. Malcolm squeezes his eyes shut and drops his head against the wooden balustrade, letting out a long, broken whimper of absolute, unavoidable defeat. The shrill, piercing pitch of Brittany's screams shatters whatever fragile silence remains in the upstairs hallway. She violently shoves herself away from Malcolm as if his ruined bespoke suit has suddenly caught fire. Her hands rake through her expensive blonde extensions, pulling at the roots, while her eyes dart wildly around the space. The text message from Lexi glows like a neon sign of their collective doom. It is a digital confession of their desperate, sickening conspiracy to rob an unconscious woman of her entire life savings. Before Brittany can formulate a single coherent sentence of defense, a rapid, booming series of knocks erupts from the front door downstairs. It is not the polite, measured tapping of a neighbor or a delivery driver. It is the heavy, authoritative pounding of law enforcement demanding immediate entry. Simultaneously, violent strobes of red and blue light begin to wash through the grand arched window at the end of the corridor. The alternating colors paint the expensive floral wallpaper in frantic, chaotic patterns, illuminating the sheer terror etched across my parents' faces. The heavy thud of car doors slamming shut outside echoes up from the driveway, followed by the sharp bursts of police radio static piercing the quiet suburban night. Cynthia presses her hands against her cheeks, her breathing accelerating into a rapid, high-pitched hyperventilation. She stumbles forward, completely ignoring the fact that her son-in-law is currently pinned to the floor in handcuffs by a police officer. She grabs the sleeve of my blazer, her fingers digging painfully into the dark fabric. "Who is that?" Cynthia gasps, her eyes wide and bloodshot as she stares toward the illuminated staircase. "Melanie, you have to go down there and tell them to leave. Tell them it is a mistake. The Worthingtons live right next door, and they are on the country club admission committee. If they see police cars parked in our driveway, we will be completely ruined. Fix this right now." I look down at my mother's trembling hands, feeling absolutely zero pity for her rapidly collapsing social empire. I deliberately reach over and peel her fingers off my sleeve, pushing her hand away with a firm, dismissive motion. I step into her personal space, forcing her to look me directly in the eye. "You cared much more about your precious country club reputation than my actual physical well-being when you locked me out of this house in the dead of winter." I state clearly, my voice carrying a freezing, absolute calm that forces her to take a step back. "I was 17 years old, Mom. I was exactly 15 minutes late for curfew because my piece of junk car broke down in the snow. But instead of answering the door, you left me freezing on the porch for 4 hours. You had the club president over for wine and did not want to disrupt your elegant evening with the presence of a dramatic, shivering teenager." Cynthia's mouth opens and closes soundlessly. The color drains from her neck down to her collarbone. She looks at me as if she is seeing a complete stranger. "So, no, Mom, I will not save your reputation." I finish, turning my back on her entirely. "Deal with your guests yourself." The heavy thudding sound of boots against the hardwood foyer echoes up the staircase. Officer Jenkins immediately steps forward, positioning his body at the top of the landing to secure the perimeter. He keeps one hand resting on his utility belt, completely unbothered by the dramatic meltdown happening behind him. He nods curtly to the officers approaching from below. 3 individuals march into view, ascending the grand staircase with swift, uncompromising purpose. They are not local police. They are wearing dark tactical windbreakers with bold yellow lettering printed across the back and chest. Federal agents. Gregory lets out a low, miserable groan, sliding further down the doorframe until he is practically sitting on the floor. His pristine legacy, his entire arrogant belief that he was the smartest financial visionary in the room, is physically walking up his stairs in the form of a federal raid. He pulls his knees to his chest, unable to even look at the men invading his sanctuary. The agents reach the landing. They do not hesitate, and they do not ask for permission to enter the space. The sheer suffocating weight of federal authority instantly silences any remaining fight left in Brittany. She shrinks back against the wall, covering her mouth with both hands. The lead agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a stern, angular face, flashes a heavy gold badge from his leather wallet. His eyes sweep past my trembling mother, past my sobbing sister, and lock directly onto the man kneeling on the floorboards. Malcolm Thorne, the lead agent, announces, his voice booming with absolute terrifying finality. You are under arrest for multiple counts of federal securities fraud, wire fraud, and the embezzlement of $800,000 in private client funds. The Securities and Exchange Commission has simultaneously seized your corporate offices and frozen all of your known domestic and offshore financial accounts. Malcolm does not even lift his head. He sags against Officer Miller's knee, a pathetic broken shell of the arrogant provider he pretended to be just 20 minutes ago. The illusion of his immense wealth and power is entirely gone, leaving only a desperate criminal waiting to be hauled away. Then the lead agent does something that completely shatters the remaining remnants of my family's reality. He bypasses my horrified parents. He ignores Brittany's hysterical sobbing. He walks straight over to where I am standing with my tablet secured under my arm. The federal agent stops right in front of me. He straightens his posture and offers me a short, deeply respectful nod. The absolute deference in his body language makes Gregory slowly look up from the floor. "Good evening, boss," the agent says, his voice carrying a genuine tone of professional admiration. "The data packet you securely routed to our cyber division this afternoon was absolutely flawless. We had the warrants signed by a federal judge within the hour. Your forensic tracing saved us months of investigation." The word hangs in this grand foyer like a physical strike. The federal agent, a man radiating absolute authority, stands before me with quiet deference. Malcolm, still pinned to the floor in his shredded bespoke suit, twists his neck to stare at me with bloodshot, disbelieving eyes. My father, slumped against the hallway wall, looks as though all the oxygen has been violently vacuumed from his lungs. The reality of the situation is entirely incomprehensible to a family that has spent over a decade treating me as a pathetic, helpless burden. Gregory pushes himself up on trembling elbows, his face a sickening shade of gray. "Boss," he stammers, his voice cracking and weak. "You work for the government." I look down at the man who spent my entire life measuring my worth against Brittany's fabricated successes. I shake my head slowly. "No, Dad. The government hires my company. I am the CEO of Aegis Cyber. My net worth is currently 50 times the size of the retirement fund you just lost to your golden son-in-law." The financial reality shatters him completely. Gregory lets out a raw, devastated wheeze and buries his face in his shaking hands. He had sneered at my computer science degree, calling it a useless hobby, while he blindly funded Malcolm's lavish lifestyle. Now the very skill he mocked is the weapon that dismantled his fraudulent empire. Brittany finally snaps out of her catatonic shock. She lunges forward, not at me, but at the lead SEC agent. "You are lying," she shrieks, her acrylic nails clawing wildly at the air. "She is a nobody. She works out of a tiny apartment. You cannot arrest my husband based on her fake computer files. Malcolm is a millionaire." The lead agent does not even flinch. He signals to Officer Miller, who hauls a hyperventilating Malcolm to his feet. "Malcolm is a thief, ma'am," the agent states with clinical precision. "And your sister is the only reason we caught him before he wired your grandmother's entire estate to the Cayman Islands. Take him out." Malcolm offers no final words of defense. He is dragged down the grand staircase, his expensive shoes scuffing the polished wood, his head hung in absolute cowardly defeat. He does not look back at his wife. He does not apologize to the father-in-law he just bankrupted. He simply folds in on himself, a hollow shell of a man, entirely consumed by his own impending ruin. The heavy oak front door slams shut behind the federal agents, leaving a ringing, suffocating silence in its wake. The flashing red and blue lights outside continue to cast frantic shadows across the floral wallpaper, serving as a relentless reminder that the perfect suburban facade is permanently dead. My mother, Cynthia, remains paralyzed at the top of the stairs. She watches her perfect son-in-law being shoved into the back of a federal vehicle through the arched window. Her social standing, her wealth, her entire identity has just been publicly executed. Then her eyes slowly drag back to me. The realization of my wealth, the staggering sum I just casually mentioned, overrides her shock. The deeply ingrained opportunism that defines her character violently switches gears. She does not apologize for locking me out in the snow. She does not apologize for the decades of emotional abuse or the constant grinding comparisons to Brittany. Instead, she sees a lifeline. She sees a new provider. Cynthia scrambles forward. She drops heavily to her knees right in front of me, completely disregarding the expensive silk of her skirt. Tears stream down her carefully contoured face, ruining her perfect makeup. Melanie. Please, she wails, reaching out to grasp my hands with desperate clawing fingers. You have to save us. You have all this money. You can pay off Malcolm's debts before the bank seizes everything. Please, Melanie. You cannot let us lose the house. The country club will ban us. We will be ruined. I look down at my mother groveling on the floorboards. I do not pull my hands away. I simply reach into my structured leather tote bag and pull out a thick legal document stamped with a certified bank seal. I already bought the debt from the bank. I state, my voice echoing with absolute freezing finality. I own the mortgage to this house now. The desperate pleading wails freeze in Cynthia's throat. She stares blankly at the embossed seal on the paperwork, her brain struggling to process the catastrophic shift in power. You do not have to worry about the bank seizing the property, Mother. I continue, my tone completely devoid of sympathy. You have to worry about your new landlord. When Malcolm defaulted on the secondary loans he secretly took out against this estate, the bank moved to auction the debt. My corporate acquisitions team purchased it entirely in cash yesterday morning. This house, the manicured lawn, the dining room where you just allowed my sister to humiliate me, it all belongs to me. Gregory looks up from his hands, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and belated, horrifying clarity. He realizes in real time that the daughter he discarded is now holding the absolute deed to his entire existence. Brittany backs away, pressing her spine against the wall, as if the hallway itself is collapsing inward. The golden child, the perfect daughter who built her entire personality on looking down on me, is now effectively homeless. I step around my mother, leaving her kneeling on the Persian rug. You have exactly 30 days to vacate my property, I announce, walking toward my grandmother's bedroom to ensure she is safe. I strongly suggest you start packing. The country club does not allow members who live out of their cars. The heavy silence following my mortgage revelation lasts exactly 3 seconds before the entire facade of the Worthington family violently shatters. Gregory remains frozen against the hallway wall, his face cycling through a kaleidoscope of terrifying realizations. The daughter he discarded holds the deed to his home. His retirement is gone. His social standing is vaporized. And the man responsible for this total annihilation is standing just a few feet away, securely flanked by 2 federal agents. A primal guttural roar suddenly erupts from my father's chest. All his polished country club etiquette vanishes in an instant. He lunges away from the wall, his hands curled into tight, trembling fists. He marches directly toward the SEC agents holding the disgraced, handcuffed Malcolm. Before anyone can intervene, Gregory rears back his arm and delivers a brutal, cracking slap directly across Malcolm's face. The sharp sound echoes off the vaulted ceiling like a gunshot. Malcolm's head snaps to the side, a bright red handprint instantly blooming across his cheek. Restricted by the heavy steel cuffs, he can only stagger backward against the agents, his eyes wide with cowardly shock. You promised me 20% returns! Gregory screams, spit flying from his lips as he steps forward to strike him again. You sat in my study drinking my scotch and looked me dead in the eye. You swore that offshore fund was a guaranteed lock. I liquidated my entire stock portfolio for you. I emptied my pensions. You parasitic fraud. You ruined me. The federal agents firmly step between them, easily shoving my father back to prevent a full physical brawl. But the violence has already ignited the powder keg. Brittany, who had been cowering in the shadows just moments prior, suddenly snaps into a rabid frenzy. Seeing her provider husband physically assaulted triggers a vicious, unhinged defense mechanism. She charges forward, her designer heels stomping aggressively against the hardwood floor. She shoves both of her hands squarely into Gregory's chest, pushing her own father backward with staggering force. Do not touch him! Brittany shrieks, her face twisted into an ugly mask of rage. It is your own fault for being so incredibly greedy. Dad, you were practically begging Malcolm to hide your assets from the IRS. Do not act like some innocent victim now. You have been a greedy, manipulative thief your entire life. You have been greedy ever since you stole Melanie's college fund. The words slice through the chaotic screaming like a guillotine blade. The entire hallway plunges into a sudden, suffocating stillness. Even Cynthia, still weeping pathetically on the floor, freezes in absolute horror. She slowly looks up at her golden daughter, her eyes wide with panic, silently begging Brittany to shut her mouth. I stand completely perfectly still, my fingers tightening around the edges of the leather portfolio. The air in my lungs suddenly feels like jagged ice. I did not just lose my college savings to a bad market crash. I had spent years believing my parents simply could not afford to send me to my dream university. I had accepted their apologies when they claimed the family business took a bad hit right before my freshman year. I had worked 3 grueling jobs, slept in my rusted car between shifts, and drowned myself in predatory student loans just to survive while they maintained this luxurious mansion. I slowly turn my gaze toward Gregory. He is staring at Brittany with an expression of pure cornered panic. He refuses to look at me. You stole it. I state, my voice dropping to a freezing, lethal whisper that commands the attention of every person in the room. You did not lose the money in the market. You drained the account I spent 18 years thinking was safe. Brittany lets out a harsh, vindictive laugh, entirely too eager to drag everyone else down into the mud with her. Of course he stole it, Melanie. How do you think he paid for my destination wedding in the Bahamas? How do you think he bought that brand new luxury yacht, the very same summer you were eating ramen noodles in a tiny dorm room? He emptied your entire educational trust the day you turned 18. He always knew you would figure a way out on your own. He needed the cash to keep up appearances. Cynthia scrambles to her feet, her face flushed with frantic desperation. Brittany, shut your mouth right now, she hisses, grabbing her daughter's arm and digging her nails into the fabric. You are destroying everything. We can still fix this, if we just stay quiet. Fix what? Brittany screams back violently, shoving her mother away. There is nothing left to fix. Malcolm is going to federal prison. We are completely broke. Melanie owns the house. Everything is gone. I stand perfectly still, leaning against the banister, and simply watch them. I do not need to raise my voice. I do not need to unleash years of suppressed rage. I do not even need to utilize my immense wealth to destroy them. They are currently doing the job for me with terrifying efficiency. The golden, untouchable Worthington family is finally tearing itself to bloody shreds. They are behaving like starved wild dogs trapped in a cage, snapping at each other's throats to save their own skin. Gregory begins screaming at Cynthia, blaming her extravagant spending habits for draining his accounts. Cynthia screams back, slapping his chest and crying about his financial incompetence. Brittany turns her rage back to Malcolm, cursing him for being a sloppy, arrogant fool who got caught by a sibling he constantly mocked. The federal agents stand by the staircase, watching the magnificent, catastrophic implosion of an affluent suburban dynasty with thinly veiled amusement. The air is thick with the toxic, suffocating stench of betrayal, greed, and total ruin. Then a sound cuts through the violent shouting. It is not a loud noise. It is not a shout or a scream. It is a dry, raspy, deliberate sound of movement coming from the master bedroom directly behind me. That is quite enough. The voice is weak, rough from disuse, but carrying an unmistakable razor-sharp authority that commands absolute obedience. Every single person in the hallway freezes instantly. Gregory stops mid-shout. Cynthia drops her hands from her face. Brittany spins around, her eyes wide with total disbelief. I slowly turn around and look through the open doorway of the master bedroom. My grandmother Beatrice, the woman who has supposedly been in a deep, unresponsive coma for the past 3 weeks, is moving. She reaches up with steady, deliberate hands and peels the clear plastic oxygen tube away from her face, tossing it carelessly onto the bedside table. She grips the heavy wooden headboard and pulls herself up into a seated position against the pillows. Her eyes, previously vacant and closed to the world, are wide open. They are bright, focused, and terrifyingly lucid. She looks directly past me, her piercing gaze locking onto Gregory and Cynthia with an expression of absolute, unyielding fury. She does not look like a dying woman. She looks like a matriarch preparing to deliver an execution. The silence in the hallway is absolute heavy and suffocating like a vacuum. The sound of Beatrice's voice, dry, raspy, yet carrying a terrifying whip-crack authority, freezes the blood in the veins of every single person present. For 3 excruciating seconds, nobody dares to move. They are trapped in a paralyzing nightmare, staring into the master bedroom where the impossible is currently happening. Cynthia's reaction shatters the stillness. She lets out a piercing, hysterical scream, the sound tearing through her throat as if she has just witnessed a corpse rise from a casket. She scrambles backward on her hands and knees, her expensive designer skirt tangling awkwardly around her legs as she collides with the hallway wall. "Mother!" Cynthia shrieks, her voice pitching into a frantic, unhinged frequency. She points a trembling, jewel-encrusted finger toward the bed. "No, this is impossible. The doctor said you were in a coma. You were entirely unresponsive." Beatrice does not look like a woman who has spent the last 3 weeks hovering on the precipice of death. The vacant, sunken expression she had maintained with such flawless, terrifying dedication vanishes completely. Her spine straightens against the pillows. The fragile, trembling demeanor is instantly replaced by the rigid, commanding posture of a matriarch who built a financial empire from the ground up and outright refuses to let parasites dismantle it while she breathes. With slow, deliberate movements that radiate absolute power, Beatrice pushes the heavy embroidered quilt aside. She swings her legs over the edge of the mattress, planting her bare feet firmly on the plush bedroom carpet. She ignores the chorus of panicked gasps echoing from the hallway, keeping her piercing, hawk-like gaze locked directly on her trembling, pathetic daughter. "I haven't swallowed a single pill you have handed me in 3 weeks, Cynthia," Beatrice states, her voice sharp and steady, slicing through the heavy air of the bedroom. "Not one. I have been holding them under my tongue until you turned your back or left the room, and then I have been spitting them directly into the soil of that miserable imported ficus plant in the corner." Cynthia's eyes dart wildly toward the large, leafy potted plant near the window, her mind violently struggling to process the monumental, humiliating deception. She stammers, raising her hands as if to ward off a physical blow. "Mother, I was only trying to help you. The new medication was prescribed for your own good. It was for your pain. Do not insult my intelligence." Beatrice snaps, her tone cracking like a whip. "I knew exactly what you were trying to do the very moment you fired Martha. Martha was my trusted registered nurse for 5 years. You dismissed her without my permission, claiming you needed to save money on my care." Beatrice leans forward, her eyes flashing with a dangerous, long-overdue fury that forces Cynthia to cower. "You used that exact same pathetic excuse to deny Melanie braces when she was 12 years old. You claimed the family budget was far too tight for orthodontics, yet you walked into the house the very next day wearing a $10,000 Cartier necklace. You have always valued your own vanity over the basic needs of your children, and you genuinely thought you could apply that same ruthless, transparent greed to my life and my estate." Gregory, still slumped against the hallway wall, where he had been screaming at his son-in-law just moments prior, looks as though he might physically vomit. His mouth opens and closes silently, resembling a suffocating fish. The realization that his mother-in-law has been entirely lucid washes over him like a tidal wave of doom. She has been listening to every single hushed conversation, every whispered plot to steal her assets, and every arrogant declaration of victory. Brittany presses her hands against the sides of her head, shaking it back and forth in rapid, frantic denial. "No!" she whimpers, stepping away from the bedroom door, her eyes wide with terror. "No, this isn't happening. You were asleep. You couldn't hear us." "I heard absolutely everything, Brittany," Beatrice corrects her, her voice dripping with absolute zero ice. "I heard you complain about the smell of my hand lotion. I heard Malcolm pacing the floor, swearing that the offshore wire transfer would clear before the bank investigators noticed the missing funds. And just moments ago, I heard your father proudly admit to stealing the very educational trust fund that my late husband and I explicitly established for Melanie's future." Cynthia is hyperventilating now, clutching her chest as she attempts to construct a defense out of thin air. "Mother, please. You are confused. The medication must have made you paranoid. We were trying to protect your estate from taxes. We were trying to secure the family legacy. You do not have a legacy, Cynthia, Beatrice replies, standing up from the bed. She does not wobble. She does not hesitate. She stands with the absolute power of a woman who has just successfully orchestrated the complete destruction of her enemies. You have a house of cards built entirely on lies, theft, and profound moral bankruptcy, and tonight the wind has finally blown it all down. I stand near the doorway, watching the magnificent, terrifying spectacle unfold. For years, I had felt entirely alone in my assessment of the family's deep-rooted rot. To see my grandmother not only validate my reality, but completely outmaneuver the people who thought they were untouchable, is a profound, deeply satisfying vindication. But how? Gregory finally manages to croak out, his voice a pathetic, trembling shadow of its former arrogance. The doctors, the neurologists, they all confirmed the rapid cognitive decline. They said you were completely unresponsive. Money buys many things, Gregory, Beatrice says, looking down her nose at the man who married her daughter, including the loyalty of a private independent specialist who is more than willing to sign a fabricated medical chart if it means helping me trap the vultures circling my bed. I knew the only way you would ever reveal your true malicious intentions was if you wholeheartedly believed I could no longer stop you. Cynthia lets out a ragged, desperate sob, her hands pulling at her hair. You set us up. You deliberately tricked your own flesh and blood. I simply handed you the ropes, Cynthia, Beatrice replies coldly, her gaze unwavering. You and your husband are the ones who eagerly tied the noose and wrapped it around your own necks. Without breaking eye contact with her weeping daughter, Beatrice reaches up to the high ruffled collar of her silk nightgown. With precise, unflinching movements, she begins to unbutton the delicate fabric. Cynthia covers her mouth, anticipating some sort of gruesome medical horror, but the truth is infinitely more devastating to their fraudulent empire. As the fabric parts, Beatrice pulls back the edge of her nightgown to reveal a small, sleek black device securely taped directly to her collarbone, resting just above her heart. A tiny, bright red LED light blinks steadily in the dim bedroom, a rhythmic, pulsing confirmation of their absolute ruin. I wasn't in a coma, Beatrice announces, her voice echoing with the crushing weight of a final, inescapable judgment. I was gathering evidence. The blinking red light of the recording device rests against my grandmother's collarbone like a sniper's laser trained directly on my parents' future. The absolute silence in the hallway is heavy enough to crush bone. Cynthia falls back against the wall, her hands clawing at her own neck as if she is suddenly choking. The narrative she has spun her entire life, the illusion of total untouchable control, evaporates in the span of a single heartbeat. Beatrice does not attempt to cover the device. She leaves her silk nightgown unbuttoned, deliberately forcing her daughter and son-in-law to stare at the instrument of their absolute destruction. She stands tall on the plush carpet, radiating a terrifying, unyielding strength that completely defies her age and the fabricated medical charts Cynthia had eagerly presented to the family just days ago. You all thought I was just a senile old bat, Beatrice sneers, her voice slicing through the heavy air and locking directly onto Gregory like a heat-seeking missile. You thought my mind was rotting simply because my body was aging. You treated me like a burdensome piece of antique furniture, smiling to my face, while casually evaluating what my estate would be worth at auction. You severely underestimated me, Gregory. Gregory shrinks back, pressing his shoulders violently into the floral wallpaper. He cannot even formulate a coherent sentence. His mouth hangs open, a bead of cold sweat dripping down his temple, as the profound shock robs his vocal cords of any function. Beatrice points a steady, accusing finger at him. Just like you thought Melanie was an utter failure because she didn't wear pearls to your ridiculous country club luncheons. You mocked her intelligence because it did not fit your archaic, pathetic standard of what a woman should be. 2 months ago, Beatrice continues, stepping out of the bedroom and into the hallway to face her tormentors fully. I noticed discrepancies in my private offshore accounts, small amounts at first, a few thousand here, a quiet transfer there. You thought I was too blind to read a ledger, Gregory. You thought I would simply nod and sign whatever power of attorney documents Malcolm shoved in front of my face under the guise of estate planning. Beatrice turns her sharp gaze toward me, and for the first time tonight, her fierce expression softens into a look of profound, unconditional respect. I did not call my useless, opportunistic daughter, Beatrice states, gesturing dismissively toward Cynthia, who is currently weeping into her hands. I did not call my spoiled, utterly vacuous granddaughter. She casts a withering look at Brittany, who is pressing herself into the corner of the hallway, desperately trying to distance herself from her own parents. I called the only person in this family with a functioning spine and a shred of moral integrity. I called Melanie. I stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with my grandmother. The shift in power is absolute and irreversible. For decades, it was Cynthia Gregory and Brittany standing united against me, making me the designated scapegoat for every family inconvenience. Now they are the ones cornered, completely outnumbered and outplayed by the very people they attempted to exploit. Melanie came to my house that very same night. Beatrice explains, her voice ringing with triumphant authority. She did a forensic audit of my accounts in 3 hours. She found every single hidden transfer Malcolm had authorized. She found the forged signatures. And she found the secondary mortgages you took out on this estate, Gregory. So we set a trap. Melanie gave me this panic button and wiretap, Beatrice says, tapping the small black device on her chest. The technology is completely undetectable to standard medical equipment. It records crystal clear audio and transmits it directly to a secure server. Cynthia lets out a strangled, pathetic gasp, looking up through her mascara-stained tears. You planned this. You faked a medical emergency just to spy on your own flesh and blood. We needed you all in one room, committing the fraud on camera, so you could never contest the will. Beatrice fires back, stepping aggressively into Cynthia's personal space. If I had simply changed my documents to leave everything to Melanie, you and Gregory would have spent the next decade dragging her through probate court. You would have claimed I was not of sound mind. You would have tied up her inheritance in endless legal battles out of pure malicious spite. But you cannot contest a will from a federal prison cell. The lead SEC agent, who has been quietly standing at the top of the staircase observing the spectacular implosion of the Worthington family, suddenly steps forward. He reaches into his tactical windbreaker and pulls out a sleek black digital receiver. We have 72 hours of audio, including your conversations about letting Beatrice die. The agent announces, his booming voice shattering whatever fragile hope remained in my parents' eyes. He looks directly at Cynthia, his expression hardened with absolute professional disgust. Cynthia's entire body begins to tremble. The realization of what she whispered in the dark, the vile, calculating plans she made while standing over her mother's seemingly comatose body, comes crashing down on her. Attempted manslaughter is out of our jurisdiction. The federal agent continues, his tone dropping to a lethal, authoritative timbre as he gestures toward the foyer below. But the police officers here will gladly handle it. Heavy, synchronized footsteps echo up the grand wooden staircase. 4 local police officers ascend the steps, their hands resting on their utility belts, their expressions grim and uncompromising. They do not care about the Worthington name. They do not care about the country club admission committee. They step onto the landing, completely surrounding my paralyzed, terrified parents. The sharp metallic clatter of steel unlatching from leather utility belts breaks the paralyzing spell, holding the hallway hostage. The 4 local police officers do not hesitate. They move with practiced, synchronized precision, completely unfazed by the opulent surroundings or the expensive rugs beneath their heavy boots. Officer Jenkins, a seasoned veteran who looks entirely tired of wealthy suburbanites, steps directly into Gregory's personal space. He grabs my father's shoulder, spinning him around with enough force to make Gregory stumble in his custom Italian loafers. Gregory instinctively, violently jerks his arm away, his deeply ingrained arrogance flaring up for one final pathetic stand. "Do not put your hands on me," he barks, his voice trembling with a mixture of outrage and terror. "Do you have any idea who I am? I am personal friends with the chief of police. I am on the board of the country club. You cannot treat Gregory Worthington like a common criminal." The officer does not care about the country club. He does not care about the Worthington name. He simply grabs Gregory's wrist, twists it sharply behind his back, and slams him chest first against the floral wallpaper. The impact rattles the framed family portraits hanging on the wall. The heavy steel cuff clicks securely around Gregory's right wrist, followed immediately by the left. My father. The man who spent my entire life acting as the untouchable king of a pristine castle lets out a high-pitched, breathless whimper as his cheek is pressed against the drywall. His social armor is completely gone. Simultaneously, two other officers converge on my mother. Cynthia realizes exactly what is happening. The reality of a jail cell of criminal charges of absolute public disgrace finally breaches her delusion. She begins to thrash wildly, her designer silk blouse tearing at the shoulder as an officer firmly grabs her arm. "Get off me!" Cynthia shrieks, kicking her expensive heels against the officer's shins. "This is a mistake. We were just trying to protect my mother. She is sick. You cannot arrest me." The officer easily overpowers her frantic struggling, wrestling her arms behind her back. The second pair of handcuffs ratchets shut with a loud, final click. The physical constraint completely breaks her. Cynthia drops to her knees, forcing the officers to awkwardly hold her up by her triceps. Her carefully maintained hair falls in messy, tangled strands across her face. Her mascara runs down her cheeks in thick black rivers. Finding no sympathy from the police or the federal agents, Cynthia twists her neck to look wildly at me. Her eyes are wide, bloodshot, and completely devoid of the haughty superiority she has worn like a crown for 3 decades. She resorts to the ultimate desperate weapon of a toxic parent. "Melanie, stop them!" Cynthia wails, her voice cracking into a raw, guttural sob that echoes off the vaulted ceilings. "Tell them to let me go. I am your mother. I carried you for 9 months. I gave you life." I stand perfectly still, looking down at the woman currently sobbing in police custody. I feel absolutely no pity. I feel no obligation. I feel only a profound, clarifying emptiness where a daughter's love should have been. I step forward, closing the distance between us so she can see the absolute finality in my eyes. "And you spent the next 33 years trying to destroy it," I state coldly, my voice completely stripped of emotion. "You gave me life, but you spent every single day making sure I felt entirely worthless for living it. You isolated me, you mocked my ambitions, and you deliberately sabotaged my future just to make sure Brittany looked brighter by comparison. You did not want a daughter. You wanted a scapegoat." Cynthia chokes on a sob, shaking her head in frantic denial, but I do not stop. "So no, Mom, I will not save you." I continue stepping back and gesturing toward the staircase. "You are finally facing the consequences of your own monstrous greed. Have fun in holding. I hear the jumpsuits do not come in designer labels." My mother lets out a devastating, breathless wail. It is the sound of a woman mourning her own social execution. The officers haul her to her feet without a shred of gentleness. They begin marching her toward the staircase. Gregory is dragged right behind her, his head hanging in total weeping defeat. As they are marched down the grand staircase, the front door is pulled wide open by the SEC agents leading the way. The flashing red and blue lights of the cruisers illuminate the expansive front lawn. I walk to the top of the landing and look out through the massive foyer window. The Worthington nightmare has become a public spectacle. The neighbors have stepped out of their pristine mansions, pulling their robes tight against the night air. Mrs. Gable from next door is standing at the edge of the driveway, her hand covering her mouth in shock. The entire neighborhood is watching Cynthia and Gregory Worthington, the self-proclaimed royalty of the subdivision, being shoved into the back of police cruisers in handcuffs. Cynthia sees the neighbors watching. She lets out a final humiliated cry and ducks her head, trying desperately to hide her ruined face from the judging eyes of her peers. The doors of the police cruisers slam shut, sealing their fate. The federal agents offer me one last respectful nod before stepping out into the cool night air, leaving the front door standing wide open. The silence slowly creeps back into the house, thick and absolute. I turn away from the window, breathing in the quiet reality of my reclaimed life. My grandmother sits comfortably on the edge of her bed, watching the driveway with an expression of deep, vengeful satisfaction. The toxic empire has fallen. but the silence in the hallway feels slightly off. I turn my head, my eyes scanning the corridor. The chaos of the arrests, the screaming, and the flashing lights had completely consumed the attention of every person in the room. In the midst of the violent distraction, the golden child had calculated her odds of survival. I catch a flicker of movement near the shadows. As my parents' cruisers prepare to pull out of the driveway, Brittany is slowly, silently backing toward the guest bedroom door. Her expensive handbag is clutched tightly against her chest, her shoes held firmly in her free hand to muffle her footsteps. She keeps her eyes fixed on me, her breathing shallow and terrified, desperately trying to slip away unnoticed into the night. I do not even turn my head. I keep my gaze locked on the flashing police lights illuminating the driveway outside the window as I speak, my voice carrying clearly through the sudden quiet of the mansion. Stop her at the stairs. Brittany freezes mid-step. She barely has a fraction of a second to process the command before heavy footsteps echo from the adjoining corridor. Two more uniformed officers step out from the shadows of the west wing, planting themselves squarely at the top of the landing. They block her only viable escape route, forming a physical barrier between my sister and her pristine, fraudulent life. Her expensive designer heels clatter uselessly to the hardwood floor. The handbag she was clutching so desperately slips from her grasp, spilling a chaotic mess of luxury cosmetics, platinum credit cards, and car keys across the vintage Persian rug. The absolute terror radiating from her eyes is something I have never witnessed before. This is the golden child, the woman who has never faced a single consequence in her 30 years of existence, suddenly colliding with a reality that her parents cannot buy her way out of. Brittany's knees completely buckle. She falls to the floor, her meticulously styled hair collapsing around her face in a disheveled, frantic mess. The haughty, superior posture she usually wears like a suit of armor dissolves instantly into a puddle of hysterical, breathless weeping. She scrambles on her hands and knees, ignoring the mess of her spilled purse, and crawls a few inches toward me. "Melanie, please!" Brittany wails, her voice pitching into a shrill, desperate whine. She reaches her trembling, manicured hands out her chest, heaving with manufactured panic. "I'm your sister. We played together. We shared a room." I slowly turn away from the window and walk toward her. I look down at the woman who spent her entire life stepping on my neck to elevate herself, using my constant humiliation as the foundation for her own ego. I feel absolutely no pity. I feel no familial obligation. I feel only a profound, clarifying emptiness, where a sister's love should have been. We shared a room. I state, my tone stripped of any warmth, slicing through her hysterical sobs like a scalpel, until you demanded a walk-in closet and Mom moved me to the unfinished attic. Brittany chokes on her breath, shaking her head rapidly in frantic denial, but I do not stop. I step close to her, forcing her to look up and face the absolute finality in my eyes. "You did not even say thank you." I continue, my voice dangerously quiet. "You just complained that my moving boxes were blocking the hallway. You spent the rest of your life mocking my clothes, my job, and my existence just to keep yourself entertained. You stood in this very hallway, complaining about the smell of Grandma's hand lotion while actively participating in the theft of her estate. You aren't a sister, you're an accomplice." Beatrice watches the exchange from the bedroom doorway, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The grandmother, who had silently absorbed their insults for weeks, now stands as the ultimate judge of their moral bankruptcy. "You always were a weak, transparent creature, Brittany," Beatrice states, her voice ringing with icy disdain. "You coasted on your mother's superficial standards, believing that a pretty face and a malicious tongue were suitable replacements for character. You married a man whose only discernible talent is moving stolen money across international borders, and you thought you were brilliant for it." Brittany flinches, as if physically struck. She violently wipes her eyes, smearing dark makeup across her pale cheeks. "Malcolm didn't do anything wrong. We were just investing the money. It was going to grow the family wealth. Your husband is already in federal custody," the lead SEC agent announces, stepping heavily back into the hallway from the foyer. He holds a thick manila folder in his hands, tapping it methodically against his palm. "We picked him up at the country club 20 minutes ago. He was attempting to board a private charter out of the county. Brittany lets out a choked, devastated gasp. The last pillar of her fraudulent empire has just been completely demolished. She scrambles backward like a cornered animal, her hands pushing frantically against the floorboards. The agent walks directly toward her, his expression completely devoid of sympathy. He does not see a weeping, frightened woman. He sees a white-collar criminal, who arrogant enough to believe she was entirely above the law. "I didn't do anything," Brittany shrieks, her voice breaking into a terrified squeal. "I just signed what Malcolm told me to sign. I didn't know what it was. I'm just his wife. I didn't take the money." The agent stops right in front of her, looking down with a mixture of professional detachment and profound disgust. He opens the manila folder and pulls out a heavily highlighted legal document, holding it up so the stark black ink is visible under the hallway chandelier. "Ignorance is not a valid legal defense," the agent states, his voice authoritative and booming, demanding absolute compliance. He begins to read her rights, the standardized phrasing sounding like a death knell for her luxurious lifestyle. Then he drops the final inescapable truth. "Brittany, your signature is on the LLC that laundered the stolen retirement funds. You are listed as the primary managing director of the shell company that siphoned over $3 million from your grandmother's accounts." Brittany stares at the paper, her jaw trembling violently as her own looping practice signature stares back at her. The reality of her husband's betrayal and her own eager, unquestioning complicity crashes over her in a tidal wave of ruin. She had happily signed away my grandmother's life to fund her own vanity, and now the bill has finally come due. "You're going down with your husband," the agent finishes, gesturing sharply to the two local officers. The officers step forward, grabbing Brittany by her arms and hauling her roughly to her feet. She kicks and thrashes, a sudden burst of primal panic overtaking her, but she is absolutely no match for their grip. The cold steel of the handcuffs snaps around her wrists, securing her hands behind her back. The loud metallic clicks echo through the hallway, joining the chorus of destruction that has systematically dismantled this family tonight. The metallic clicks of the handcuffs securing Brittany's wrists are still ringing through the upper hallway when a fresh wave of chaos erupts from the ground floor. The massive oak front door, left standing wide open by the departing officers, frames the frantic, strobing red and blue lights of the police cruisers. Heavy, purposeful footsteps stomp across the marble tile of the grand foyer. Two federal agents march a man up the porch steps and shove him unceremoniously into the bright light of the entryway. It is Malcolm. He is still wearing his pristine white country club polo and custom-tailored khaki trousers, a pair of expensive aviator sunglasses hanging uselessly from his collar. His perfectly coiffed hair is disheveled, and his hands are pinned securely behind his back in heavy steel cuffs. Malcolm violently twists his shoulders, attempting to shake off the agent's firm grip. His face flushed with a dark, panicked red. He is shouting about his civil rights, demanding to speak to his golf partner, who happens to be a federal judge, and threatening to sue the entire Securities and Exchange Commission for harassment. Then he looks up. Malcolm's frantic gaze sweeps up the grand wooden staircase and lands on the second-floor landing. He sees my grandmother standing tall and entirely conscious in her bedroom doorway. He sees me standing beside the lead SEC agent. And finally, his eyes drop to the floor where his wife, the woman he swore to love and protect, is currently kneeling on the Persian rug with her hands cuffed behind her back, weeping hysterically into her own lap. The arrogant, entitled bluster drains out of Malcolm instantly. The reality of the situation hits him like a freight train. He realizes there is no judge to call, no bribe to pay, and no legal loophole to exploit. The entire fraudulent empire has collapsed, and he is standing at the epicenter of the wreckage. Survival instinct, raw and utterly devoid of loyalty, takes over his brain. Malcolm does not ask if his wife is all right. He does not demand that the officers release her. Instead, he locks eyes with the lead federal agent standing next to me and immediately attempts to cut a deal using his own wife as the bargaining chip. "It was her idea," Malcolm yells, his voice cracking as he violently jerks his chin toward Brittany. "I told her it was too risky. I told her we should just wait for the inheritance, but she wouldn't listen." Brittany's sobbing halts instantly. Her head snaps up, her tear-streaked mascara-stained face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. She stares down at the foyer, entirely unable to comprehend that the man who helped her drain our grandmother's accounts is now offering her up to the authorities to save his own skin. Brittany wanted the Aspen house. Malcolm screams, his voice echoing off the high vaulted ceilings of the mansion as he tries to step toward the stairs, only to be held back by the agents. I was just trying to make her happy. She never stops demanding more. She threatened to divorce me if I didn't figure out a way to get the capital for the ski lodge. I was manipulated. She's a gold digger and she bled her own grandmother dry. The absolute silence that follows his declaration is deafening. The golden couple, the picture-perfect duo who spent the last 5 years terrorizing this family with their manufactured superiority, has turned into a pair of cornered rats turning on each other for survival. Brittany's shock morphs into a feral, uncontrollable rage. Her face contorts into something monstrous. She struggles against the two officers holding her by the arms, kicking her bare feet wildly against the hardwood floor. "You lying coward," Brittany shrieks, her voice tearing through her throat in a guttural, raw frequency. "You set up the offshore accounts. You told me it was untraceable. You swore you were smarter than the auditors." Malcolm shakes his head frantically, playing the desperate victim. "I just signed the paperwork you put in front of me. You handled the estate planning." Brittany loses the last shred of her carefully curated socialite dignity. She lunges forward against the officer's grip, leans her head over the banister, and forcefully spits down at him. The saliva lands directly on the sleeve of his expensive polo shirt. "You are pathetic," she screams, her voice echoing with venom. "You are a failure of a man, Malcolm. You dragged me into this." The two agents in the foyer grip Malcolm tightly, preparing to drag him out the front door and into the waiting transport vehicle. The spectacle is entirely pathetic, a fitting end to a marriage built entirely on greed, superficial status, and stolen money. I step forward, placing my hand on the polished wooden railing of the staircase. I look down at my brother-in-law, who is still desperately trying to convince the federal agents that he is an innocent, henpecked husband who was simply forced into committing massive financial fraud. "It doesn't matter whose idea it was, Malcolm," I state, my voice projecting clearly over Brittany's frantic, ragged breathing. Malcolm freezes, looking up at me with wide, terrified eyes. I reach into the front pocket of my blazer. I pull out a small silver USB drive, holding it up between my thumb and forefinger so the light from the chandelier catches its metallic surface. I hold the instrument of his absolute destruction steady, making sure he recognizes exactly what it is. My forensic audit did not stop at the bank ledgers. I explained, descending the first 3 steps so I am looking directly down into his panicked face. "When I bypassed the firewall on your private home server, I found the backup drives you thought you had securely wiped. You are remarkably sloppy with your digital footprint, Malcolm." Malcolm's face drains of all color. The desperate pleading energy vanishes, replaced by a cold, suffocating dread. He stops pulling against the agents. "This drive contains every deleted email, every offshore account routing number, and every single fabricated invoice you used to siphon the funds." I announce, my tone completely devoid of mercy. I pause, letting the weight of the evidence crush the air out of his lungs before delivering the final fatal blow to his marriage and his freedom. "It also contains every text message you sent to your mistress Lexi using company funds." Brittany stops thrashing. Her entire body goes completely rigid. She turns her head slowly, staring at me with hollow, uncomprehending eyes. "The first-class flights to Dubai." I continue listing the items with methodical, punishing precision. "The luxury penthouse lease in downtown Seattle. The $50,000 diamond tennis bracelet you bought her the exact same week you told Brittany the market was down and you couldn't afford her Aspen house." Brittany lets out a sound that barely resembles a human voice. It is a low, suffocating wheeze of total, unimaginable betrayal. She looks down at Malcolm, who is now staring at the floor, completely unable to meet his wife's eyes. The money is gone. The reputation is gone. And now the illusion of her perfect marriage has been publicly slaughtered. "You're both going to federal prison," I state, the absolute finality of the sentence hanging heavy in the grand foyer. "And you are going to hate every single second of it." Malcolm's knees give out completely. He does not try to stand. He does not try to argue. He slumps heavily to the marble floor, his weight entirely supported by the two federal agents gripping his arms. He hangs his head a broken, utterly defeated man, realizing that his house of cards has finally burned to the ground. The federal agents do not give Malcolm the luxury of wallowing in his shattered reality. Two officers haul him roughly to his feet by his armpits, dragging him upward until he is forced to stand under the unforgiving glare of the crystal chandelier. His designer loafers drag against the marble tile. He looks completely hollowed out, staring blankly ahead, as the sheer magnitude of his impending federal prison sentence paralyzes his mind. The police begin marching the family members down the grand staircase toward the massive double doors of the foyer. The procession is a beautiful, chaotic parade of absolute ruin. The flashing red and blue lights from the cruisers outside spill through the stained glass transom windows, casting fractured, panicked shadows across the opulent walls. My grandmother and I follow closely behind them, matching their pace, step for step. We watch the empire of lies crumble in real time. Beatrice walks with impeccable, terrifying posture. She does not lean on the banister. She does not waver. The fragile, dying woman they had so eagerly plotted to bury is entirely gone, replaced by the ruthless matriarch who built this estate from the ground up and has just successfully purged it of its parasites. As we reach the bottom landing, Gregory suddenly digs his heels into the plush Aubusson rug. He forcefully plants his feet, forcing the officer escorting him to jerk to a halt. My father breathes heavily, his chest heaving under his tailored suit jacket. He looks around the magnificent entryway, staring wildly at the sweeping dual staircases, the imported Italian marble columns, and the expensive oil paintings lining the walls. His eyes dart frantically, desperately trying to cling to the illusion of his own power. "This is a mistake," Gregory stammers, his voice cracking with a pathetic mixture of outrage and denial. "You cannot take me out of here. I am the patriarch of this family. I built this." He twists his head, looking up at the vaulted ceiling, as if expecting the house itself to intervene on his behalf. My house. My legacy. I step off the final stair, standing directly in his line of sight, so he is forced to look at the daughter he spent 3 decades treating like a worthless inconvenience. "My house," I correct him, my voice ringing with absolute 0-degree authority. Gregory blinks, his brow furrowing in genuine confusion. He shakes his head against the officer's grip. "What are you talking about?" "My name is on the deed." "Not anymore," I reply, stepping closer. "You took out 3 massive secondary mortgages on this estate to cover your catastrophic, impulsive investments over the last 5 years. You were quietly bleeding this property dry, completely convinced you could simply pay it all back once you inherited grandmother's portfolio. But you defaulted on the final balloon payment 2 weeks ago, Gregory. The bank was quietly preparing to foreclose. So I bought the debt. I paid it off in full through a private holding company. I hold the deed. This is my property now. And since it is an active crime scene, my private security team will be changing the locks in 10 minutes. You have nothing." Gregory physically sags, the remaining fight completely draining out of his muscles. The color vanishes from his face, leaving him looking pale, old, and utterly defeated. The grand legacy he had spent his entire life bragging about at country club dinners does not exist. It belongs entirely to the daughter he deemed too inadequate to succeed. Brittany, being marched right behind him, lets out a shrill, panicked gasp. She looks from Gregory to me, her eyes wide with mounting terror. "You bought the house!" she shrieks, her voice pitching into hysteria. "Where am I supposed to go? Malcolm's accounts are frozen. We do not have the Aspen Lodge. Where am I supposed to live? You can ask your husband's mistress if she has room on her sofa," I suggest coldly. "I hear the penthouse you paid for is quite spacious." Brittany lets out a feral scream of frustration, pulling violently against the handcuffs, but the officers easily march her forward toward the open front door. The cool night air rushes into the foyer, bringing with it the static crackle of police radios and the murmurs of the gathered neighbors, watching from the edge of the manicured lawn. Seeing the flashing lights and the waiting police cruisers, Cynthia suffers a total catastrophic breakdown. The reality of walking out of her pristine mansion in handcuffs wearing a torn silk blouse and being paraded in front of her wealthy peers finally breaks her mind. She stops moving entirely, forcing the officers to literally drag her across the marble floor. "Wait!" Cynthia cries out, twisting her neck frantically to look back at the grand staircase. "Stop. I need to go back upstairs. I need my things." An officer gives her a firm push toward the door. "Keep moving, ma'am. You do not need anything where you are going." "Please," Cynthia begs, her voice dissolving into a desperate, wretched sob. She looks wildly at Beatrice, then at me. "My jewelry. Let me at least take my jewelry box. The Cartier necklace. The diamond tennis bracelets. They are family heirlooms. I cannot leave them here. Please, just let me get my jewelry." The lead SEC agent, who has been quietly supervising the extraction from the center of the foyer, steps directly into Cynthia's path. He looks down at her tear-streaked face, his expression completely devoid of mercy. He adjusts the cuffs of his tactical windbreaker and offers her a tight, profoundly unsympathetic smile. "Ma'am, the jewelry was purchased with embezzled funds," the agent states, clearly, his voice carrying over the chaotic noise of the entryway. "Every single diamond, every designer watch, and every piece of gold you currently claim to own was bought using money stolen directly from your mother's accounts. It is federal property now." The SEC agent does not wait for Cynthia to process the loss of her precious diamonds. He signals to the arresting officers with a sharp nod. They grip Cynthia by the arms and propel her forward, forcing her through the towering mahogany front doors and out into the biting chill of the night air. I step out onto the expansive front porch, the cool breeze rushing past me. Beatrice walks slowly but steadily to my side. I reach out gently, taking my grandmother's fragile but warm hand in mine. Together we stand at the top of the sweeping stone steps, flanked by the towering marble columns of the estate that now legally belongs to me. The scene unfolding on the driveway is a masterpiece of poetic justice. The flashing red and blue strobes from 4 separate police cruisers paint the pristine landscaping in harsh, unforgiving colors. But it is not the police presence that makes Cynthia freeze in her tracks. It is the audience. The Worthington estate sits at the heart of the most exclusive country club subdivision in the state. Privacy and pristine reputations are the currency of this neighborhood. Tonight, that privacy has been violently shattered. Dozens of neighbors have spilled out from their multi-million-dollar homes. They stand on their perfectly manicured lawns, their silk robes pulled tight against the wind. Every single one of them is holding a smartphone. The glowing screens form a jagged wall of digital witnesses. They are recording every humiliating second of the Worthington family's destruction. For 20 years, my mother ruled this specific cul-de-sac with an iron fist and a plastic smile. She hosted the extravagant summer galas. She dictated the HOA rules. She spent decades curating an absolute illusion of flawless, wealthy superiority. Whenever these exact neighbors asked about her youngest daughter, Cynthia would wave her hand dismissively over a crystal flute of champagne. "Melanie is simply finding herself," Cynthia would lie, her tone laced with manufactured boredom. "She is traveling abroad, doing charity work in developing countries. She is a free spirit, not suited for our kind of world. She deliberately hid my existence to ensure no one saw the scapegoat she emotionally tortured behind closed doors. She erased me so the spotlight would shine exclusively on Brittany, the perfect, obedient golden child." Now the cameras capture the undeniable truth. Brittany is the first to be marched down the long, sweeping driveway. She is completely barefoot, having abandoned her custom heels in the hallway. Her expensive designer dress is wrinkled and stained with her own makeup. She ducks her head, her tangled blonde hair falling forward to shield her face from the glaring camera flashes. She whimpers pathetically, trying to hide behind the broad shoulders of the officer escorting her. The golden child, stripped of her stolen wealth and unearned arrogance, is nothing but a weeping, terrified fraud. Malcolm is dragged out right behind her. The men standing on the neighboring lawns are the same men Malcolm played 18 holes of golf with every single Sunday. They are the men he bragged to about his offshore investment strategies and his brilliant financial acumen. Now they watch in silent, judging contempt as he shuffles toward the squad car, a ruined embezzler who threw his own wife to the wolves to save himself. Malcolm refuses to lift his head. He stares fixedly at the asphalt, completely broken by the public exposure of his crimes. Gregory follows his heavy boots dragging against the pavement. He looks toward the edge of the property, desperately searching for a single friendly face among the crowd. He spots Mr. Sterling, the president of the country club board, standing near the ornate brick mailbox. Gregory opens his mouth, perhaps to plead his case, perhaps to offer one final pathetic lie. But Mr. Sterling simply shakes his head in disgust, turns on his heel, and walks back toward his own house. Gregory's shoulders collapse inward. The patriarch has officially been exiled from his own kingdom. Finally, the officers march Cynthia down the stone steps. She fights them every inch of the way, her breath coming in ragged, hysterical gasps. The camera flashes from the neighbors' phones illuminate her ruined face. Her carefully maintained social armor is entirely gone. Her mascara runs in thick, dark lines down her cheeks. The silk blouse she bought with my grandmother's stolen money is torn at the collar. This is the woman who spent my entire childhood telling me I was an ugly, worthless embarrassment. This is the woman who told me I would never amount to anything, who ensured I slept in an unfinished attic while she bathed in stolen luxury. I stand tall on the porch, my shoulders pulled back, my grip firm on my grandmother's hand. I do not look like a discarded, unwanted daughter. Framed by the grand entrance of the mansion, I now own, breathing the air of my absolute victory. I look like royalty. I have reclaimed my life, my grandmother's dignity, and my future. I survived their cruelty and weaponized it to dismantle their entire existence. The officers guide Cynthia toward the final police cruiser parked at the end of the driveway. One of the officers opens the heavy rear door, placing a firm hand on the top of Cynthia's head to guide her into the cramped, caged back seat. Right before she is shoved into the dark interior of the squad car, Cynthia violently twists her body around. She fights the officer's grip just enough to look back up the long driveway. Her bloodshot, frantic eyes lock onto mine. She sees me standing on the porch of the house she can never enter again. She sees Beatrice, the mother she exploited and plotted to cast aside, looking down at her with cold, unwavering judgment. In that singular, agonizing second, the absolute totality of her failure crashes down upon her. The delusion shatters. Cynthia realizes she has lost the country club status she worshipped. She has lost the stolen millions that funded her vanity. She has lost her freedom to a federal prison sentence. And she has permanently lost the daughter she so casually threw away. She has absolutely nothing left. Cynthia lets out a final, devastating shriek of pure despair, just as the officer shoves her into the back seat. The heavy steel door of the police cruiser slams shut instantly, cutting off the sound of her wailing, sealing her fate in absolute silence. The red and blue strobes bounce off the brick facades of the neighboring houses one final time before the police cruisers shift into gear. The heavy tires roll down the long driveway, crunching over the pristine gravel, taking the architects of my lifelong misery with them. Mrs. Gable and the rest of the neighborhood audience slowly lower their phones, whispering frantically to one another as they retreat into their own flawless homes. The flashing lights disappear around the bend of the cul-de-sac, swallowing the chaos into the night. The profound, heavy silence of the Worthington estate returns. But this time the quiet does not feel oppressive. It does not carry the constant, suffocating threat of Cynthia's screaming or Gregory's belittling lectures. It feels remarkably clean. The air itself seems lighter. It feels like a massive toxic weight has been lifted from the foundation of the house itself. I stand on the porch for a moment longer, letting the cool wind wash over my face. I survived them. I survived 33 years of being the scapegoat, the punching bag, the designated failure. I survived their cruelty, and tonight I weaponize the truth to dismantle their entire existence. I exhale a long, steady breath into the crisp night air. I turn to my grandmother, who is still standing tall beside me on the porch. She offers a small, satisfied nod. We do not need to exchange words. The victory is absolute. I guide her gently by the arm, and we step back inside, closing the massive mahogany doors behind us, and locking the judging eyes of the world out. We walk past the foyer, stepping over the scattered contents of Brittany's spilled designer handbag. Her platinum credit cards and expensive lipsticks lie abandoned on the floor, useless artifacts of a life she will never lead again. We enter the formal living room. The space is vast and immaculate, filled with Cynthia's ridiculous antique vases and Gregory's expensive leather armchairs. For decades, this room was a stage where they performed their roles of the perfect wealthy family while treating me like a disease they had to hide. I spent countless holidays standing in the corner of this very room listening to them boast to their friends while actively ignoring my presence. Now the room is entirely ours. Beatrice settles into the center of the plush velvet sofa, adjusting her silk robe with practiced elegance. I take a seat in the armchair opposite her, resting my hands on my knees. The adrenaline of the arrests is slowly beginning to fade, replaced by a deep, resonant calm. The empire of lies has completely crumbled. The toxic noise that defined my entire existence has been permanently silenced. Beatrice reaches into the deep pocket of her robe. Her hand emerges holding a thick cream-colored envelope sealed with dark red wax. She rests it on the glass coffee table between us, tapping her manicured fingernail against the heavy parchment. "I am an old woman, Melanie." Beatrice states, her voice sharp and perfectly clear, completely lacking the frailty she had feigned for the past 6 months. "But I am certainly not a foolish one. I knew exactly what Gregory and Cynthia were doing the moment they started asking about my portfolio. I saw the greed taking root in Brittany's eyes. I watched Malcolm sniffing around my assets like a starving dog. I look at the sealed envelope, realization beginning to dawn on me. I sat in that wheelchair day after day." Beatrice says, her voice steady and commanding. "I listened to Cynthia complain about the smell of my medicine. I watched Gregory appraise my jewelry while I was wearing it. I let Brittany pretend to hold my hand while she texted Malcolm about offshore accounts. It was repulsive, but I endured every second of their disgusting performative affection because I needed them to feel completely safe. I told them they were getting everything to bait them," Beatrice continues, her eyes glinting with a ruthless, calculated intelligence. "I dangled the entire estate right in front of their greedy faces. I played the weak, declining matriarch whose mind was slipping. I knew that if I gave them enough rope, they would eagerly hang themselves. They thought they were manipulating an old fool. They had no idea I was simply gathering the evidence required to lock them away." She slides the envelope across the glass table toward me. "They spent months plotting to steal what was never going to be theirs in the first place." Beatrice says, a faint, victorious smile playing on her lips. "This is the real will." I pick up the heavy envelope, breaking the wax seal with my thumb. I pull out the thick stack of legal documents. The paper is crisp, the legal jargon dense and uncompromising. I flip directly to the summary page detailing the distribution of her assets. I read the text once, then read it again, my heart hammering a steady rhythm against my ribs. Beatrice did not just cut them out, she completely, legally annihilated their future. The document explicitly disinherits Gregory, Cynthia, Brittany, and Malcolm, by name barring them from contesting the estate under any circumstances. But she did not just leave the money to me directly. Beatrice has placed her entire $5 million estate along with 100% of the original family business shares into an ironclad, irrevocable trust. I look up at my grandmother, completely stunned by the sheer brilliance of the legal maneuver. "You made me the sole managing director of the trust." I state the magnitude of the power settling over me. "Exclusively," Beatrice confirms, leaning back into the sofa. "The trust is completely bulletproof. It cannot be altered, it cannot be challenged, and it cannot be dissolved by a judge. The wealth is completely shielded." I trace my finger over my name printed in bold ink as the primary beneficiary. By structuring the inheritance this way, Beatrice has ensured that the assets are completely protected from any civil lawsuits, creditors, or federal seizures that might target Gregory and Cynthia in the aftermath of their criminal convictions. The money is untouched and untouchable. Even if my parents somehow manage to secure a plea deal, even if Malcolm and Brittany somehow survive their federal prison sentences and attempt to crawl back into society, in a decade they will never be able to access a single dime of the Worthington wealth. They cannot sue me for it. They cannot manipulate their way back into it. The fortune they destroyed their lives to steal is permanently locked away completely under my absolute control. They worshipped status, Beatrice says softly, watching the realization wash over my face. They worshipped money above their own flesh and blood. So I made absolutely certain that the one person they deemed unworthy of their precious society is the only person who holds the keys to the kingdom. I closed the legal packet and set it gently down on the glass table. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, once a reminder of the endless agonizing hours spent in this house, now sounds like a steady heartbeat of victory. The terrified, shrieking faces of my parents and my sister flashed through my mind one final time. They boarded those police cruisers believing they had just lost a fortune. They do not even realize the true extent of their defeat. They lost the fortune years ago, the very moment they decided to treat me as an outcast. I look around the quiet, massive living room, then back to my grandmother. A genuine, unrestrained smile breaks across my face. The golden child and her accomplices have lost the only thing they ever truly loved, and I finally have my life back. 6 months is exactly enough time for the dust to settle, the wreckage to be cleared, and a new foundation to be built in iron and glass. The view from the 44th floor of my Manhattan high-rise office is nothing but endless blue sky and towering steel. I stand by the floor-to-ceiling window looking down at the crawling yellow cabs and the bustling, wealthy chaos of Wall Street. I am wearing a sharp, custom-tailored charcoal suit, the fabric moving like liquid armor, as I turn back to the massive oak desk, dominating the center of the room. The board of directors for the Worthington Holdings Group, now completely purged of my father's greedy, enabling cronies, sits in the adjacent glass-walled conference room. I just finalized the acquisition of a massive commercial real estate firm, closing a deal worth $80 million. The ink is barely dry on the contracts resting on my desk. I am not just managing my grandmother's wealth. I am multiplying it with a ruthless, calculated precision that would make Gregory weep. The men and women in the boardroom pack up their briefcases, offering me deeply respectful nods through the glass. They do not see the scapegoat daughter who is forced to sleep in a drafty attic. They see a titan. They see their boss. I press a silver button on a sleek remote resting on my desk. The massive flat-screen monitor mounted on the far mahogany wall hums to life. I tune it to a prominent national financial news network, a channel my parents used to leave playing in the background of their pristine mansion to feign intellectual superiority. The bright red chyron flashing at the bottom of the screen reads, "Worthington Empire Fallout Sentencing Reached." I increase the volume, letting the news anchor's polished, serious voice fill my private office. The camera cuts to the federal courthouse steps in Boston. The press pool is massive microphones and cameras shoved aggressively toward the heavy glass doors. Gregory and Malcolm are escorted out by armed U.S. Marshals. The physical transformation of these two men is absolutely staggering. They are completely stripped of their bespoke Italian suits, their imported silk ties, and their unearned arrogance. Instead, they wear matching brightly colored, ill-fitting orange jumpsuits. Their wrists are bound by heavy steel chains attached to a restrictive waist belt, forcing them to shuffle forward in tiny, humiliating steps. Gregory looks hollowed out. His posture is severely stooped, his face gray and aged by a decade in just 6 short months. He refuses to look at the cameras, knowing perfectly well that his former country club peers are watching him do the perp walk on national television. Malcolm is actively weeping. His head hangs low in absolute trembling terror as the reality of a maximum security facility sets in. The anchor confirms the judge's ruling with crisp finality. They have been handed 10-year federal prison sentences with absolutely no possibility of early parole. 10 years behind concrete walls and barbed wire for wire fraud, severe embezzlement, and conspiracy. The patriarchy of the Worthington family has been permanently locked inside a 6x8 steel cage. The broadcast shifts to a secondary segment detailing the absolute liquidation of their remaining assets. The SEC seized everything to pay back the stolen funds. The penthouse, the luxury imported cars, the hidden offshore accounts, and the country club memberships are entirely gone. The anchor notes that the spouses, while managing to avoid actual prison time through a desperate groveling plea deal, were heavily penalized and ordered to pay back the remaining debts through court-mandated labor. The screen flashes to a piece of B-roll footage captured by an investigative journalist. My breath catches in a harsh, involuntary laugh. It is Cynthia and Brittany. They are not at a country club brunch. They are not sipping mimosas or shopping for designer bags on Fifth Avenue. They are standing behind the stainless steel serving line of a massive industrial county cafeteria. It is a mandatory condition of their strict probation, forcing them to work minimum wage jobs to pay off their mounting legal restitution. They are wearing drab, shapeless beige polyester uniforms that swallow their figures. Cynthia's hair, once perfectly blown out and color treated every Tuesday, is shoved unceremoniously into a mandatory, highly unflattering nylon hairnet. Her face is completely devoid of the expensive foundation contouring and fillers she relied on, revealing the deep, harsh lines of bitterness and exhaustion she spent a fortune trying to hide. Brittany is standing over a massive industrial sink. She is aggressively scrubbing a vat of congealed food, her hands encased in thick, heavy yellow rubber gloves. She looks utterly defeated, sweating profusely under the harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights. Her golden child entitlement has been completely scrubbed away by the brutal daily reality of physical labor. They have permanently traded caviar and champagne for hairnets and scrub brushes. The heavy glass door to my private office swings open, breaking my focus. I mute the television, plunging the room back into a serene, wealthy silence, and turn around. Beatrice steps into the room. The sight of her makes my chest swell with absolute, fiercely protective pride. The frail, dying woman confined to a wheelchair in that suffocating house is a complete ghost of the past. Today, Beatrice stands tall and vibrant, radiating a terrifying, regal energy that commands the entire room. She is draped in a pristine white tweed Chanel coat, a string of flawless South Sea pearls resting elegantly against her collarbone. Her eyes are sharp, bright, and completely alive. She walks across the plush carpet, her designer heels clicking rhythmically, moving effortlessly, without the assistance of a cane or a nurse. She stops directly in front of my desk, pulling two crisp, heavy paper envelopes from her quilted handbag. She drops them onto the polished oak surface, right next to my finalized acquisition contracts. They are 2 first-class international boarding passes. "Ready for our trip to Italy, CEO?" Beatrice asks, a brilliant, genuine smile lighting up her face. I look down at the boarding passes, then up at the grandmother who trusted me with her life, her legacy, and her ultimate revenge. I reach over and softly snap my laptop shut. The glowing screen goes dark, officially ending the workday. I step out from behind the massive desk. Beatrice links her arms securely through mine, her grip warm and strong. We walk out of the office together, moving past the executive receptionist, who immediately stands to offer a deeply respectful goodbye. We step into the private elevator, descending 44 floors to the secured underground parking garage. The polished steel doors slide open to reveal a massive black armored SUV waiting in the VIP loading zone. The private security driver immediately steps out, opening the heavy rear door for us. We slide into the luxurious leather seats, surrounded by the quiet hum of the powerful engine. The driver pulls out into the bright, bustling streets of Manhattan, merging seamlessly into the flowing traffic. I look out the tinted window at the blurring city lights, leaving the wreckage of the past permanently behind forever. The story of Melanie and Beatrice powerfully illustrates that true strength is forged in adversity, not inherited through entitlement. When a family prioritizes superficial status, greed, and toxic favoritism over genuine love, they inherently build a fragile empire destined to collapse. Melanie's ultimate triumph teaches us that enduring relentless emotional abuse does not break you, it sharpens your resilience. By setting unbreakable boundaries and quietly securing your foundation, you completely reclaim your narrative. True wealth always lies in unyielding integrity. Stand up to toxic dynamics, protect your peace, and boldly rewrite your ending today. Please comment below with your thoughts.